Chapter 1153. Purple-eyed Bodhisattva stared coldly at the mountain gods and earthly lords. That's amazing. Dei Venerable's eyes widened as he murmured, "This is the power of the human realm. If I can control the power of the land of the netherworld, TSK, this will be fun." Not only Purple-eyed Bodhisattva, but even Dei Venerable and Shangren Shojua were stunned. They knew that the 7 Buddhas and 9 Taoists had their own reasons for pushing the apotheosis plan, but they never imagined that these weak deities could summon such terrifying power after the apotheosis. The 500 golden arhats chanted the name of Buddha in unison as a white beam shot out from their heads into the sky. Fist-sized relics spun in the white beam, illuminating the void with their white light, intending to fight against the suppressive power of the city gods, mountain gods, and earthly lords. But even the 500 golden arhats could not fight against this world. Those mountain gods and earth gods roared out together, while the 500 golden arhats vomited blood. Large cracks appeared on their relics one after another, along with a series of creaking noise. Just then, a clear Buddhist chant was heard from afar. A fragrant wind wafted over and a ray of light bloomed as a golden Buddha walked over, stepping on a lotus throne inlaid with 8 treasures. Everyone was stunned. Dei Venerable frowned and said, "What is the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, doing here?" Amitabha smiled and nodded. He reached out and rubbed the top of Purple-eyed Bodhisattva's head thrice and said, "You should not be here." But an invisible force came crashing down from the void. To their horror, the 8 Vajras realized that they were not facing these puny city gods, mountain gods, and earthly lords. What came crashing down on them was the power of the earth veins of thousands of surrounding mountains, with the Great Dragon Mountain Range as the core. It was the power of life of all living beings within 100 million miles, including the power of fate of all the people in the surrounding hundreds of thousands of cities. Everyone was shocked. Dei Venerable shouted, "Everyone, it was not me who killed that damned old woman." Although they were all deities and were protected by the heavenly divinity position, it was still easy to injure them so badly that they couldn't be seen in public for 3 to 5 years. Therefore, the purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva only stared coldly at the land of the mountain gods and suddenly sneered, "I'm not in the mood to bicker with you. Right and wrong have their own justice. I just want to bring back my poor child. Don't tell me you think that these shameless people can hurt a single hair on this poor nun's head." However, in front of the million Buddhist soldiers led by the purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva, the tens of millions of mountain deities, earthly deities, and netherworld soldiers could kill them all with just one Bodhisattva, 100 golden arhats, and tens of thousands of Buddhist soldiers. Amitabha smiled and heaved a long sigh. He is a good boy, but he has lost his mother. How sad he must be. But, before she could come up with a solution, the natural energy around the million Buddhist soldiers suddenly disappeared. Not only that, but the air around them had also disappeared, and the space around them had turned into a completely empty space. On top of that, the space had become extremely hot and was madly sucking the energy in them. Dei Venerable sneered, "If the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs don't come out, we'll just kill those 6 fools." Just the appearance of the land gods and the city gods near the Great Dragon Mountain Range had produced such incredible power. There were countless mountains on Panga continent that were thousands of times larger than the Great Dragon Mountain Range, and there were waters that were vaster than the land. Countless rivers and rivers had conferred the title of water god. If all the deities of land and water were to come out, together with the power of the few mountain god emperors and water god emperors, how much power of the heavenly Tao could they use? The Lord Buddha, Amitabha, had a very high status in the Buddhist League. After all, except for the reclusive revered one and the Buddhist patriarchs, he was the supreme leader of the Buddhist League. Most of the time, he was the spokesperson of the Buddhist League, and his every word and deed represented the will of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. So, as soon as he appeared, the city gods, land gods, and mountain gods all put away their cultivation techniques and bowed to him in awe. They were even more respectful than they were to Reverend Shojua. Reverend Shojua smiled faintly, flicked his sleeve, and uttered the word, "Subdue." The strongest of these land gods now had a power equivalent to a 30th tier heaven immortal, while the Ain soldiers were all 36th tier heaven immortals. Although they had lost their immortal bodies and divine sense, their cultivation bases and magic power had been greatly enhanced, and they could use all kinds of divine abilities given by the heavenly Tao. Coupled with their huge numbers, they were a force that could not be underestimated. But suddenly, a green-faced and fanged mountain god darted out of the crowd and snapped, "How dare you destroy my land of incense?" The tens of thousands of miles tall avatar shattered with a boom, and the bodies of the 8 Vajras returned to the height of ordinary men. Blood sprayed from their bodies as they fell from the sky and smashed hard into a mountain. The mountains on Panga continent were tough, but for existences like the 8 Vajras, they were like tofu pudding. Usually, the 8 great guardian deities could turn a mountain into ashes with a casual breath, let alone a heavy blow from them. A power like this might be able to completely suppress a world breaker who had not yet recovered his energy. With a string of Buddhist beads in his hand, Amitabha came to the side of purple-eyed Bodhisattva with a smile and chanted the name of Buddha. Reverend Shojua clenched his fists and cried out in a low voice, "Before I return, try your best to take control of the 3 realms. I don't believe these divine positions are really united, and I don't believe we can't get involved. We'll use threats and promises, treasures and beautiful women at the same time, and we'll seize their secrets and blackmail them. No matter what, we'll control some of them and make them ours." In just a short span of a few breaths, there were already thousands of mountain gods in the vicinity of the Great Dragon Mountain range that had rushed over. Even the city gods of the nearby Eastern Sea and the tens of thousands of cities in the southern border had hurried over with their subordinates. The word "subdue" was uttered one after another, and gradually, it gathered into a continuous sound wave that spread across the world like the roar of a great bell. "Please help me, Lord Buddha," said purple-eyed Bodhisattva bitterly. "My poor child. Years ago, I was being hunted by my enemies, but Lord Buddha saved me, and that's how I converted to the Buddhism League. It was also Lord Buddha's mercy that saved my child. It's just that the child's fetus is injured, so he hasn't transformed for so many years. But Lord Buddha has always appreciated his comprehension." The purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva was very smart. She kept saying the word "Buddha" because she wanted to kill Amitabha and get him to save her child. This was a child that even Lord Buddha appreciated. As Lord Buddha's trusted subordinate, how dare Amitabha not try his best to save him? The million Buddhist soldiers felt as if hundreds of millions of mountains were pressing down on them. The 8 Vajras guarding the gate of the Great Vulture Mountain gave a muffled snort and roared furiously. Their bodies grew to tens of thousands of miles tall, and they activated the Vajra subduing demons of the Buddhism League, using all their strength to blast the void. With the power of the 8 Vajras, they could overturn rivers and seas, move the stars and the moon. They cultivated the Vajra subduing demons of the Buddhism League, and their Vajra subduing demons were famous in Panga world. Just as the 2 of them were coming up with a plan, purple-eyed Bodhisattva suddenly bellowed, "Stop! Listen to me." Countless mountain gods bellowed furiously together. Immeasurable power of mountain gods poured into the mountain god's body, and the mountains suddenly erupted with powerful, dark green light. The 8 Vajras howled in pain when they collided with the mountain. They were sent flying several miles into the air, and countless of their bones were broken. Every single one of them grimaced in pain, and at least 100 front teeth sprayed out of their mouths with dazzling white light. By now, the mountain gods and earth gods that had rushed to the surroundings of the Chan monastery of Great Naga were no longer just the gods of the Great Dragon Mountains. After all, Lord Shojua was a mighty great celestial emperor. When he bellowed furiously, who among the lesser gods with the lowest position dared not to rush over and fawn over him? After the War of Conferred Gods, the 7 Buddhas and 9 Paths of Tao had schemed for countless years to confer the positions of these gods. The power of these gods of the heavenly laws was finally displayed for the first time today. Countless city gods, mountain gods, earth gods, and other gods did not use any of their powers at all. The ghost soldiers did not use any of their powers either. They only used their authority within the divine throne of the heavenly laws, merging everyone's authority as one and activating the divine power of the heavenly laws to suppress them. Even though purple-eyed Bodhisattva had already lost her mind from anger, she still bowed towards Amitabha politely. She understood just how different her identity was from Amitabha. Amitabha was the master of Buddhism appointed by the Buddha, while she was only a gatekeeper and a servant who cleaned the courtyard outside the Buddha's door. This was like the difference between the head of a country's state council and the cleaner of the state council's headquarters. Purple-eyed Bodhisattva had no choice but to be careful. The mountain gods and earth gods glanced at one another. After all, they feared Lord Shojua's identity as the great celestial emperor, so they all answered carefully and cried out, "Suppress," in unison. Afterwards, they drew their various weapons and pointed them at the ground viciously. Only then did purple-eyed Bodhisattva's expression change. How could these insignificant mountain gods and earth gods, who were like ants, join forces and unleash such a terrible power of the heavenly Tao? Purple-eyed Bodhisattva was, after all, the gatekeeper of the Buddha. After witnessing with her own eyes the incredible power unleashed by these weak-yin gods, she finally understood what the Buddha meant when he said that one could completely control the heavenly Tao after becoming a god in the three realms. All kinds of strange and unpredictable forces merged into one, turning into a power of the heavenly Tao that made the 8 Vajras' faces fall. It was not the city gods, mountain gods, or earth gods who were fighting against them, but the heaven and earth that were suppressing them. In the face of the power of heaven and earth, even though the 8 Vajras had incredible cultivation bases, they could only howl and fall from the sky. With a cracking sound, Amitabha's pale golden palm pressed on purple-eyed Bodhisattva's head suddenly exerted force. A beam of black demonic light smashed into her body and shattered it. Just as 13 fist-sized golden relics were about to fly out from the shattered golden body, Amitabha had already opened his mouth and swallowed them all. These little gods were just the most ordinary cultivators when they were alive, and even if some of them managed to attain enlightenment, they were at most 36th-tier heaven immortals. But, after being conferred as gods and receiving the divine power of the heavenly Tao, although they had transformed from immortals into gods with half-spirit bodies, their overall strength had improved to a certain extent. If the surrounding city gods, mountain gods, and earth gods, who did not even have the cultivation base of gold immortals, were to besiege them with so many yin soldiers, the 8 Vajras were confident that they could kill them all without suffering any damage, as long as they spent a little time at most. The weapons these mountain gods pulled out were spears, halberds, hunting forks, bows, and arrows, while the earth god pulled out crutches, long rulers, and horsetail whisks. As they cried out in unison, the yin soldiers did the same. Chi-Chi waved the various weapons in his hands in all directions. Chapter 1154. Reverend Shojua's long brows were knitted tightly together, forming a knot the size of a date between his brows. Meanwhile, Dei's supremacy roared with all his divine abilities, his voice so loud that all the almighty experts in the 33 heavens, Mount Gajrakota, and even Panga continent and the netherworld could hear it clearly. That bald donkey Amitabha killed this old hag, and it has nothing to do with me. Dei's supremacy tried his best to distance himself from this conflict of interest. Others might be fine, but this purple-eyed spirit-suppressing bodhisattva might only be a bodhisattva title, but he had the cultivation of a revered Buddha. Furthermore, he was someone who guarded the Buddha's home. If he was killed in Dei's supremacy's place, the consequences would be dire. An old bodhisattva would always have a few best friends in Mount Gajrakota. If Dei's supremacy was to blame for this, things would get really interesting. Although Dei's supremacy's cultivation base was strong enough, he could not afford to be targeted by those Buddhist League's eminent virtues in Mount Gajrakota. Amitabha, who had killed purple-eyed Bodhisattva with a palm strike, smiled. The string of 108 purple crystal beads the size of longans in his hands suddenly flew out and transformed into 108 heads of fiend gods shrouded in purple mist. Baring their teeth, they leaped toward the other 18 bodhisattvas. These 18 bodhisattvas were all of unusual origins. After being subdued by the Buddhist League, they had all worshipped purple-eyed Bodhisattva, and were usually on duty to guard the Buddha's cave abode. Because of this, the pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. They were usually instructed by the Buddha, and their cultivation bases were extremely strong. But in the face of the inconspicuous 108 heads of fiend gods, they were stunned at the same time. Their eyes were blurred, and they just let the heads pounce on them. Although they were only bodhisattvas, they all had the cultivation base of Buddhas and had long formed their golden bodies. The so-called bones of jade, muscles of ice, and marrow of gold were nothing more than this. The fiend gods opened their mouths and bit into them with cold, sharp teeth, causing their skin and flesh to creak. In just a few seconds, the faces of the 18 bodhisattvas withered, and the once handsome Buddhist League's eminent virtues were sucked dry like mummies. Monster, how dare you be so impudent? The 500 golden-bodied arhats had just been severely injured, but seeing that their leader, the purple-eyed soul-suppressing bodhisattva, was killed, and the 18 bodhisattvas with the cultivation of Buddha were about to follow in her footsteps, the 500 arhat Chichi raised his hand, and 500 Vajra pearls of Buddhism struck down at the same time. These Vajra pearls were made from the relics left behind by the Buddha when he died. They were incomparably hard and heavy, capable of splitting mountains and splitting the earth. Amitabha smiled. Dense devil chi surged out of his body as he allowed the 500 diamond pearls to hit him at the same time. A loud sound that sounded like the ringing of a bronze bell rang out. Amitabha was forcefully beaten back more than 10 steps. Sticky black blood spurted out from his 7 apertures at the same time. He let out a few strange laughs and casually pointed at the 18 bodhisattvas. The heads of those fiend gods twisted at the same time, and the 18 bodhisattvas seemed to be bewitched, unable to resist at all. In the blink of an eye, more than 80% of their blood essence had been devoured. The 500 golden-bodied arhats were shocked and infuriated. Chichi rose to his feet, recalled the Vajra pearls, and struck Amitabha again. At the same time, they exhausted all the energy in their bodies and chanted the evil-suppressing mantra of Buddhism in unison. The infinite power of Buddhism condensed into 108 secret talismans of the 6 runes of Buddhism in the void, and crashed into the bodies of the 18 motionless bodhisattvas like the Milky Way. Furious roars came from the mouths of these bodhisattvas. Some were the roars of dragons, some were the roars of tigers, some were the roars of leopards, and some were the cries of apes. The 18 bodhisattvas widened their eyes at the same time, locked their palms together, and thrust them outwards. The heads of the fiend gods attached to their bodies were shaken off at the same time, and their sharp teeth tore off large chunks of muscles that emitted the fragrance of sandalwood. Evildoer, return my master's life to me. A dying bodhisattva waved a crimson embroidered ball and threw it at Amitabha. The other 17 bodhisattvas struck at the same time, each unleashing their proudest magical treasures of Buddhism. Amitabha sneered. He retracted the heads of the fiend gods that were sent flying away, then transformed into a string of amethyst beads and hung on his wrist. Like a phantom, he easily dodged the attacks of the 18 bodhisattvas, then transformed into a dark cloud and plunged into the ranks of the 500 golden-bodied arhats. The dark cloud came with a bone-piercing coldness. With just a sweep, 300 arhats turned into dried bones and fell to the ground. Their flesh, blood, energy, and natal relic were all devoured by the dark cloud. The million Buddhist soldiers cried out in alarm at the same time. The 200 golden-bodied arhats fled in all directions, but the 3,000 jidis and many arhats and vajras were rushing toward them. The size of the dark cloud suddenly increased by 12 times, wiping out the remaining 200 golden-bodied arhats. The 3,000 jidis could only let out a cry of alarm, and just as they activated their magical treasures of Buddhism, 1,800 of them were devoured by the dark cloud. The 18 severely wounded bodhisattvas roared hoarsely as they drove their lotus thrones and chased after the dark cloud. But, as 80% of their cultivation base was strangely sucked away, how could they catch up with the dark cloud that moved as fast as lightning? The 8 vajras rose into the sky furiously as well. Enduring the pain, they surrounded the dark cloud and were about to form a formation to trap it. But, as soon as they found their positions in midair, the dark cloud suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Countless pitch-black skeletons were left in the air. They were the only things left behind by the fallen Buddhist saints. All 500 golden-bodied arhats, 3,000 Jedis, and 12,000 guardian kings were killed. In just a few breaths of time, the Buddhist League had lost nearly 50,000 men, and all of them were important figures who usually acted as the face of the Buddhist League. Their cultivation bases might not be very high, but they were the face of the Buddhist League, just like the row of the brightest and most tender fruits placed in front of the fruit vendor. They were the signboards of the Buddhist League. Who in the world did not know the mighty name of the 500 golden-bodied arhats of the Buddhist League? Who had not heard of the power of 3,000 Jedis? Who did not know that any of the 12,000 guardian kings of the Buddhist League had the power and influence to suppress an entire galaxy? But now, all these illustrious figures had been killed, which was even more shocking than the fall of those reclusive revered ones. After all, no one had heard of those reclusive revered ones for many years. So what if they were dead? At most, the Buddhist League would just close their doors and mourn for them. But, the death of these reclusive revered ones was like scraping off the golden paint on the face of a gilded Buddha statue, revealing the true color of the clay underneath. It was a very unsightly sight. The 8 Vajras hovered blankly in midair and did not say a word for a long time, while the 18 Bodhisattvas sat on their lotus thrones with ashen faces, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. After some time, a bodhisattva with countless crow's feet at the corner of her eyes suddenly jumped up. She pointed at Supremacy de and scolded, "Supremacy de, you are the one who colluded with the demon to transform into the true form of Lord Buddha and killed so many Buddhist disciples." Supremacy de was dumbfounded. He was just complaining about being wronged, so why did someone suddenly put the blame on him? Rolling his eyes, Supremacy de bellowed, "Bullshit. With which eye of yours did you see me collude with that evildoer? Damn it, that bastard might be Amitabha's true form. Oh, I know now. In order to seize my power and to harm me, you used the ruse of self-injury to frame me? Damn it, you are all putting on a show to trick me." The 8 Vajras and the 18 Bodhisattvas almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Have you ever seen a ruse where all the elites are destroyed? Let alone the Lord Buddha, Amitabha, even the revered ones who fought over power with Supremacy de would not be bold enough to put on a show like that. The Lord Buddha's gatekeeper was dead, and the 500 golden arhats, 3,000 Jyoti, and 12,000 guardian kings of Buddhism who were usually the most renowned in Buddhism were all dead. Not even a sliver of their soul was left behind. Who would be bold enough to use these people's lives to put on a show? A bodhisattva trembled in anger. She barked, "Demon monk de, you must have done this. Why, you are guilty of the most heinous crimes." A series of resonant Buddhist chants rang out in the air. The 18 revered ones directly ripped open space and arrived above the Chan monastery of Great Naga in a hurry with their unknown holiness of Buddhism. Supremacy de rolled his eyes and barked, "You sure are fast. Ha, aren't you a little too despicable? In order to frame me, you actually colluded with the demon to torture and kill your own disciples. Do you really have to go so far?" The ancient coffin Buddha who possessed the highest status and seniority among the 18 revered ones, the one people usually referred to as the coffin Buddha, brought his palms together and snorted coldly through gritted teeth. "Supremacy de. You must give the Buddhist school an explanation for this. Why did so many elites of the Buddhist sect die in your dojo?" Before Supremacy de could defend himself, the coffin Buddha ground his teeth so hard that they creaked. The corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows were filled with indescribable joy, but he put on a pained expression and barked, "Purple-eyed soul suppression Bodhisattva was the Lord Buddha's gatekeeper, yet you actually colluded with the demon to kill her. Purple-eyed's 18 disciples are all Buddhas, yet now, they've been reduced to the strength of peak golden immortals. There are also the 500 golden arhats, 3,000 Jyoti, and 12,000 guardian kings of Buddhism. You must shoulder the responsibility for the deaths of these people." Supremacy de stomped his foot in anger. He roared furiously, "Old coffin, what the hell does this have to do with me? I was cultivating in secluded cultivation in my own monastery, yet someone died at my doorstep. Am I supposed to take responsibility for them? Damn it, they came to my monastery for no reason, so who is going to take responsibility for this? Reverend Shozhua cried out sarcastically, "Alas, the internal strife of your Buddhist league has actually come to such a point." TSK, sitting in seclusion at home, disaster comes from the sky. Great monk, tell me, how did you become a sinner who colluded with the demon? Without waiting for the coffin Buddha to speak, Reverend Shozhua smiled and said, "Greetings, venerables of the world. Well, I've witnessed everything that happened today with my own eyes. You can't blame Senior Brother De for everything." The coffin Buddha gave Reverend Shozhua a cold look and said, "Your Majesty, this is an internal affair of the Buddhist League. Please don't interfere." Reverend Shozhua was speechless for a long while. Clearly, the coffin Buddha was distorting the truth, and he was not even willing to listen to him, a witness. Shaking his head, Reverend Shozhua sneered. A beam of light rushed out of the top of his head, and the Grand Pure Universe Star Positioning Pagoda emerged soundlessly with starlight. "Since you're being unreasonable, what else is there to say?" he said coolly. "Today, I'll have a taste of your skills." Amidst the cold laughter, Reverend Shozhua said proudly, "As the Celestial Emperor, I have to maintain the purity of this world. When I see injustice on the road, I have to step on it. I only ask for justice, and I don't care about your filthy fights for power and profit." Supremacy De looked up at the sky and heaved a long sigh. Then, he gave a thumbs up and praised, "Your Majesty, you're a righteous man." The faces of the 18 venerables were so dark that ink could drip out of them. Judging by their expressions, they wished they could strangle Reverend Shozhua to death. Chapter 1155. Merciful Buddha. In the face of esteemed Shozhua and Supremacy De's declaration, Coffin the World simply chanted the name of Buddha, then pressed his palm down. The void in all directions vanished, and a huge golden Buddha palm slowly pressed down from the sky, accompanied by rolling clouds and golden light. Esteemed Shozhua's expression flickered slightly as he cried out, "Suppress." At the command of esteemed Shozhua, countless city gods, earthly gods, and mountain gods were about to use the power of the heavenly Tao to resist Coffin the World's heavy blow when a few clouds suddenly drifted down from the sky, upon which stood a few celestial lords wearing star crowns and robes, their bodies glinting with magical light. The leading celestial lord was stroking a small horsewhip in his hand as he said with a faint smile, "Your divine positions are the public weapons of the heavenly Tao. How can you use them for personal grudges?" With a simple sentence, the city gods, earth gods, and mountain gods immediately turned into gusts of chilly wind and scattered in all directions. Even the Een soldiers under their command ran away without a trace. Who did not know these celestial lords? The leading one was none other than Celestial Lord Heavenly Origin, one of the 1,080,000 celestial lords who had just been conferred. Celestial Lord Heavenly Origin, the leader of the 1,080,000 celestial lords, was the commander of the celestial lords of the celestial court, reporting directly to Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen, and was one of the 3 marshals under his command. When he was alive, he was the first disciple of Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen. Both he and Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen were killed by the terrible sword formation set up by the Wahuang clan in the night of the upheaval in Liangzhu. Therefore, he had no choice but to enter the list of investiture of the gods. They had spent millions of years together, and they had fallen at the same time. Therefore, Celestial Lord Heavenly Origin was almost the spokesperson of Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen in the celestial court. Anything he said could be regarded as the will of Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen. Since Celestial Lord Heavenly Origin had come forward to expel these city gods and earthly gods, who would dare to stay here any longer? Although esteemed Shozhua was also a great celestial emperor conferred by Daozu, all the gods of the 3 realms knew that he had been a mere figurehead in the past 2 years, and could not even order a servant in the celestial court. But Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen was different. If these city gods, celestial emperors, and earthly gods disobeyed him, there would be no end of trouble. One must know that after the heavenly court conferred the title of God, the power of heavenly Tao would even condense a God execution stage. Seeing countless Een spirits fleeing, esteemed Shozhua was so angry that his eyebrows twitched. He sneered and said, "Good, good, good. Star Lord of heavenly origin, I'll remember you today. Celestial heaven said, and of heavenly Tao, heavenly gods of the Tian of the list of gods. Celestial heaven, he of Chen Emperor, celestial Tian of celestial god is, the deities of the celestial court are the public instruments of the heavenly axiom. How can you use these deities to help you because of your personal grudge? Shaking his head and letting out a sigh, heavenly origin celestial lord smiled at Reverend Shoujua in embarrassment. Then, together with the other celestial lords behind him, he flew towards the celestial court. The corners of Venerable Shoujua's mouth twitched in anger. He suddenly sneered and said, Good. Venerable De, I will uphold justice for you today. I want to see if there is really no reason in the three realms of heaven, earth, and man. At most, I'll accompany you to the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain and ask the 7 Buddhas what they mean. Coffin World Revered One's expression changed slightly as he suddenly stopped. High up in the sky, the huge Buddha palm wrapped in golden light flew up hesitantly. Coffin the World's Exalt's expression changed rapidly. Suddenly, he said coolly, Great Violet Celestial Emperor, this is the Buddhist League's affair. Why do you have to interfere? Venerable De colluded with fiends to harm. Reverend Shoujua interrupted Coffin World Revered One's words and sneered, Do you think the 7 Buddhas will believe you? Coffin World Revered One was silent for a long time. Then, he nodded slowly and said, I'm not the only one who says so. If all my fellow disciples in the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain say so, then this matter must have something to do with Venerable De. Taking a deep breath, Reverend Shoujua slowly drew out a white jade ruler and said coolly, Cut the crap. If you want to fight, let's fight. I want you people to know that there are some things that you can't do as you please. The Celestial Court is like that, and so is the Buddhist League. Coffin World Revered One squinted at Reverend Shoujua, and suddenly, a surge of anger rose in his heart. Raising his head to look in the direction of the Celestial Court, he almost cursed out loud. In World Revered One's opinion, esteemed Shoujua was venting his anger of being ostracized in the Heaven Court on Buddhism. That was why he was pitted against De Venerable Wang Ba, who was in the same boat, and stood up for De Venerable so stubbornly. He could even imagine that the 6 legitimate great celestial emperors in the Celestial Court were watching him. They were watching a good show, but he was in a difficult position. After losing so many of the Buddhist League's signboards, if he didn't find a scapegoat, he and his people would suffer. Who was more suitable than Venerable De to be the scapegoat? He was the one who disobeyed the decision of the Buddhist League Conference and left the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain to return to his own Bodhimanda. He had a personal grudge with the purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva, and then the sudden disappearance of the purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva's son. The biggest suspect was Venerable De. He confronted the Buddhist League's army in his own Bodhimanda, causing Reverend Shoujua to intervene and almost cause a war. In the end, the devil attacked and killed so many people, and it was still Venerable De. Moreover, so many Buddhist disciples were killed in Venerable De's Bodhimanda. If Venerable De didn't have to bear the responsibility, how could he let someone else take the blame? If it was any other day, Coffin World Revered One and the others wouldn't dare to treat Venerable De like this, and they wouldn't dare to openly make a Buddhist League's fellow Taoist a scapegoat. But now, the 7 Buddhist ancestors were cultivating in seclusion. They wanted to break through to some elusive and mysterious realm, so they had no time to pay attention to the outside world. As long as they could firmly make Venerable De the scapegoat for colluding with the devil, he wouldn't be able to make a comeback no matter what. But now, with Reverend Shoujua in the middle, it was too difficult. Kill Reverend Shoujua. Coffin World Revered One and the other 17 Revered One had the ability to do so, but they didn't have the guts. Reverend Shoujua was the great celestial emperor conferred by Daozu. If they killed him, Daozu would definitely investigate when he came out of seclusion. Then, the matter of them making Venerable De a scapegoat would not be concealed. When that time came, who could bear the thunderous wrath of Daozu and Chi-Chi Buddha? Coffin World Revered One shook his head in distress. There was no need to mention the anger in his heart. He looked in the direction of the Celestial Court and sighed deeply. Although the Buddhist League's mighty figures of Gajrakota Mountain wanted to exclude Venerable De, wasn't the Celestial Court also trying to exclude Reverend Shozhua? Now that these two were in cahoots, the Celestial Court had to come out and express its concern. What's the big deal about sending a star lord of heavenly origin to drive away a group of city gods and land gods? You have to have a more substantial action. Coffin World Revered One squinted at Reverend Shozhua and Venerable De. His spirit sense had already reached the 33 Skies Hall of Light. He wanted to join hands with Yuanjun, Great Celestial Emperor. No matter what, he had to make this big scapegoat. In the Hall of Light, Yuanjun, Great Celestial Emperor, was gloating at the situation in the lower worlds through a light mirror. Seeing Coffin World Revered One's face, Yuanjun, Great Celestial Emperor, and the other 5 Great Celestial Emperors laughed at the same time. While they were laughing, a clear voice sounded in the ears of the 5 Great Celestial Emperors. Reverend Shozhua and Venerable De colluded with world breakers to kill Buddhist disciples. That's why I killed them. What do you think, Great Celestial Emperors? The 6 Great Celestial Emperors' smiles froze. They looked at each other and could not help but marvel at Coffin World Revered One's ruthlessness. Killing Reverend Shozhua and Venerable De was something that none of the Great Celestial Emperors had the guts to do, but Coffin World Revered One was very direct. After a moment of silence, Yuanjun, Great Celestial Emperor, coldly said, "If I can do it, I will speak to Daozu. But if I can't, don't blame me for knocking on the door of Dao Yuan Palace and telling the 9 Daozu everything that happened today." World Venerable Coffin's spiritual consciousness slowly left the Hall of Enlightenment, and a monstrous anger emerged in his heart for no reason. Yuanjun, Great Celestial Emperor, suddenly laughed. He shook his head and said, "That stupid Baldi. He is so bold that he caused trouble. Why did he have to bring it on us? The losses that the Buddhists suffered today. Ha ha. When the Buddha comes out, he will make them pay. Let's just watch the show. If he can kill Reverend Shozhua, that will be the best. If he can't, then let that stupid Baldi take all the blame." Yuanjun, Great Celestial Emperor, smiled. He clapped his hands and said, "Guard against the attacks of world breakers and demon breakers. Close the 4 heavenly gates and order all the clergy offices to close their doors. No one is allowed to enter or leave. None of us knew anything about what happened today." The 6 Great Celestial Emperors looked at each other and coughed up a mouthful of purple gold blood. Great Celestial the Arch-Yuan Yen sighed softly and said, "What powerful demons. I can't believe they invaded the Celestial Court and plotted against us. Luckily, we joined forces to drive them out. It's just a pity for those fellow Taoists from the Buddhist League." Yuanjun, Great Celestial Emperor, looked sad. He raised his sleeve to wipe the tears from the corners of his eyes and said, "So, the Celestial Court is still unable to resist the invasion of demon breakers, and there is nothing we can do to close the 4 heavenly gates. But Ziji Ling, Great Celestial Emperor, is still wandering outside. What if he runs into a demon tribulation?" Putting aside the fact that these old and cunning Great Celestial Emperors had already prepared all means to deal with them, Coffin the World, who had received the promise from the 6 Celestial Emperors, rolled his eyes and struck down with a backhand palm. Coffin World Revered One shed all pretense of cordiality and snapped furiously at Supremacy Dei, "You should not have interfered with our interests. We have cultivated hard in the Buddhist League for countless years, devoted ourselves to it, and risked our lives many times to get to where we are today." The 18 Revered Ones shouted in unison, "What makes you think that you can surpass the predecessors? What makes you think that Buddha will pass all his mantle to you?" 18 giant Buddha palms came crashing down from the sky. Judging by the momentum, the 18 Revered Ones weren't just going to kill esteemed Master Shozhua and De Supremacy. They weren't going to let anyone around them go. The celestial pagoda above Lord Shozhua's head shone with a bright light as he prepared to withstand the joint attack of the 18 Revered One. Supremacy Dei heaved a long sigh, narrowed his eyes, and said, "Why do I still work so hard for the Buddhist League when it is so unfair? From today onwards, I will renounce asceticism and grow my hair. I will join the Taoist sect in the future." The Grande Venerable slapped his bald head, and his long hair immediately grew out. He casually grabbed downwards, and the Bodhi tree in the monastery turned into a streak of light, rushing into the air and colliding viciously with the 18 Buddhist palms. Chapter 1156. In the translucent palace, the 6 celestial emperors were shocked. The master of Mount Vulture, appointed by the 7 Buddhas, the great supremacy with the highest status in the Buddhist League, had actually abandoned Buddhism and joined the Tao. It was like a thunderbolt had struck their heads. Despite their profound cultivation bases and high temperament, they almost jumped up and shouted. It was fun to watch the Buddhist League fight among themselves. When the 18 revered ones of the Buddhist League joined hands to kill the most outstanding genius of the Buddhist League in the recent dozens of eons, how delightful was that? But when the most outstanding genius of the Buddhist League suddenly abandoned Buddhism and joined the Tao, growing his long hair and preparing to become a Taoist priest, it was no longer delightful at all. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's face darkened as he cried out coldly, "This is simply outrageous. This great supremacy has made a great contribution to the Buddhist League, yet he was forced to leave the Buddhist League. This man is so powerful that even you and I may not be his match." If the 6 great celestial emperors' eyes flickered, and for a moment, none of them dared to look at each other. They all had the same wishful thinking in their minds. If Great Yi was still a disciple of the Buddhist League, they would only happily watch him throw away his life. But now that he had taken the oath of abandoning Buddhism and joining the Tao, perhaps, they should try to recruit him. If any great celestial emperor could recruit such a powerful fighter, it would greatly increase his or her right to speak. Although the 6 great celestial emperors were from the same Tao League, and although they were all fellow disciples, their master was not the same Daozu. They were all disciples of 6 different Daozu. However, although they were from the same Tao League, they were not fellow disciples of the same sect. Therefore, the open and secret struggles between them had revealed some clues over the past 2 years. With Great Yi's fiery temper, if they could recruit him, he would be the best candidate to break through enemy lines, kill, and set fire to the enemy lines. Moreover, he was so strong that even the great celestial emperors might not be able to suppress him, even with the help of the heavenly Tao Godhood. Anyone would be envious of such a powerful ally. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen said slowly, "We will settle today's matter impartially." Great Celestial Monarch Yuan Yen chuckled and said, "You're right. Men, open the southern heavenly gate. We're going to the lower realm." The gazes of the 6 great celestial emperors collided fiercely. It was as if invisible swords and sabers had collided countless times in the void, and sparks were almost produced. Inside the Hall of Transcendence, countless deities and immortal officials exchanged a glance, then immediately divided themselves into 6 groups and followed the celestial emperors out of the Hall of Transcendence. The sound of bugles and golden drums rang through the sky. 6 great celestial emperors of honor flew over along with rolling purple clouds. Then, the purple clouds soared into the sky and rushed directly through the southern heavenly gate to the lower realms. In the sky above the monastery, the 18 connected, golden palms struck the Bodhi tree several dozen kilometers into the ground with a single strike. Afterwards, they pressed heavily against the grand pure one star-fixing tower. White lotuses surged out from various parts of the tower like the tide. The white lotuses flickered with spiritual light, illuminating the surroundings. Countless streaks of dazzling starlight sprayed out from the stamens of the white lotuses. The stars in the sky responded to Chi-Chi, and the power of countless stars rained down, merging with the white lotuses and turning into 33 silver screens that enveloped the surroundings. The Buddhist palms were as heavy as mountains, pressing heavily against the screens and producing a thunderous rumble. The first Buddhist palm was from the exalted world of Coffin. The esteemed Master Shouju's body swayed slightly, and he could not help but sneer. He said sternly, "Is that all you've got? Break." The jade ruler in his hand trembled in the air, and the jade ruler with the patterns of a pangolin suddenly turned into a streak of jade-colored light that was 100 kilometers long. With a series of thunderclaps, it fell towards the Buddhist palm above him. The exalted world of Coffin let out a muffled grunt. The golden Buddhist palm was shattered into countless specks of light, while his right palm let out a muffled sound. A piece of skin on the webbing between his thumb and forefinger shattered, and large amounts of purple blood sprayed out, turning into countless purple crystals that fell to the ground. If the skin on the webbing was only damaged, then so be it, but the wound was actually constantly spreading towards the exalted world of Coffin's shoulder. With a series of explosions, a bloody gash extended from his webbing all the way to his right shoulder. The exalted world of Coffin's face twisted in pain. He flew backwards in a hurry, taking out a bottle of secret Buddhist ointment and smearing it on the wound in a hurry. The expressions of the other 17 exalts changed slightly. Not only was the esteemed Master Shouju's protective tower a supreme treasure of primordial, but the jade ruler he used to strike others was also a supreme treasure of supreme power. This treasure had originally hung in the treasury of the Dao Origin Palace, a private possession of the 9 Daozu. Afterwards, in order to rope in the esteemed Master Shouju, the yoga ruler became his arcane artifact. Today, a casual strike from esteemed Master Shouju had actually wounded the world of Coffin's body. The power of the yoga ruler was truly astonishing. Since esteemed Master Shouju had succeeded in one strike, he didn't want to show any mercy to these people. The yoga ruler kept whistling out, reaching tens of feet in a row. Every strike shattered the golden Buddha palm that came crashing down from the sky. All 17 exalts were struck by esteemed Master Shouju, and even though their golden bodies were strong, their bones and tendons were broken, making them look very miserable. The surrounding Buddhas roared angrily. Esteemed Master Shouju's right hand was trembling, and a large amount of purple blood was flowing down along the jade ruler. After all, it was a joint strike from 18 exalts. Although esteemed Master Shouju had broken their attacks with the power of the supreme treasure of primordial, his right palm was still torn apart by the counterforce. The yoga ruler kept shaking in his palm, rubbing against the bones of Wu Qi's fingers and producing a creaking noise that made one's teeth ache. Next to him, Reverend Dei quickly tied his hair into a bun, then pointed a finger at his kasaya, which immediately transformed into a loose Taoist robe of water and fire. He wrapped the robe around his body, then shook the Vajra scepter in his hand and transformed it into a peachwood sword commonly used by Taoists. He threw his head back and laughed coldly, then cried out angrily, "A bunch of shameless bald monks from the Buddhist League. Have a taste of my sword." Reverend Dei changed his role very quickly. Just a moment ago, he was shouting Lord Buddha, but now, he was addressing himself as Lord Buddha, in a practiced manner. Exalts Yu and the others had just been beaten up by esteemed Master Shouju, and were busy applying medicine to their wounds. But suddenly, Reverend Dei charged forward like a bear that had just had its buttock stabbed. The peachwood sword transformed from the Vajra scepter was 12 feet long, 1 foot wide, and half a foot thick, with a razor-sharp edge. It was heavy, sturdy, and mighty. No matter how one looked at it, this peachwood sword had nothing to do with a peachwood sword. But, Reverend Dei kept yelling and shouting, asking the enemy to have a taste of his sword, and then charged towards Exalts Yu with the huge sword in his hand. While cursing a bald donkey, Reverend Dei thrust the sword forward. A beam of golden light on the edge of the sword transformed into dozens of ferocious tigers, roaring and lunging towards Exalts Yu's head with their sharp teeth bared. Exalts Yu snorted coldly and waved both hands. 2 golden dragons shot out from his pale yellow sleeves. The dragons and tigers fought in midair, shaking half the sky and shaking the surrounding mountains, scaring those mountain gods who were hiding in the mountains and making them recite incantations to strengthen the mountains. These mountain gods of the great dragon mountains were even ready to die. Why were they so unlucky as to be conferred as mountain gods of the great dragon mountains? The master of the Chan monastery of Great Naga was a troublemaker. Now that 18 Buddhist exalts were up against him, who else would come later? Judging by the situation, the great dragon mountains were about to be lost. The lives of these mountain gods were closely linked to the mountains they had been conferred with. If the mountains collapsed, they would be heavily injured too, and they would be severely punished by the celestial court. Even if they managed to escape the death penalty, who knew where they would be sent off to become an inconspicuous attendant? That would truly be worse than death. Just as these mountain gods were weeping and working hard, esteemed Master Shojua had already rushed into the sky with the Lianga ruler, working together with Reverend Dei to attack the 18 revered emperors. Not to be outdone, the 18 revered emperors, including Reverend Coffin, unleashed their respective supreme treasures of Primal to fight against the two. Dozens of supreme treasures of Primal smashed all over the sky, throwing the world into chaos. Fortunately, the apotheosis of the three realms had been completed, and the structure of the world was unprecedentedly stable. Even with 20 Tao-breaking experts fighting to the death here, the world was still as stable as before. If it were before the apotheosis of gods, if they fought less than 10 miles from the ground, this piece of Panga continent, which measured hundreds of millions of miles in circumference, would have long been smashed into pieces and thrown into outer space. Both esteemed Master Shojua and Reverend Dei possessed the strength of peak Tao-breaking experts, and each had several supreme treasures of Primal with them. Although the 18 revered emperors were all Tao-breaking experts, except for Reverend Coffin, who was strong enough to fight against them, the others were much weaker than them, and the supreme treasures of Primal they possessed were not as extravagant as the two of them. Therefore, the two of them fought the 18 revered emperors head-on, and they did not seem to be at a disadvantage at all. The 6 celestial emperors, who were rushing over from the sky, could not help but feel delighted when they saw the divine abilities of the two men. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen was the most cunning and decisive. He immediately pulled out the Great Seal of the Heavenly Tao, which he had condensed when he was conferred the title of Celestial Emperor, and smashed it down. A 5-colored light flashed, and Reverend Coffin, who was locked in a stalemate with Reverend Dei, gave a muffled grunt as a fist-sized blood bubble burst out of his bald forehead. His body trembled for a while, then his eyes rolled back and he fell to the ground. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen was the great sect master of the Tao League when he was alive, and his cultivation base had reached the peak of the Tao-breaking realm. Coupled with the blessing of the heavenly Tao after being conferred the title of Celestial Emperor, his divine abilities had become even more unfathomable. Now, he had launched a sneak attack from behind, so it was easy for him to defeat Reverend Coffin. The other Celestial Emperors were shocked. They roared furiously at Chi-Chi and almost cursed it out loud. When the other 6 Celestial Emperors saw that Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen had taken the initiative to do them a favor, they had no choice but to shout in unison, "Please stop, everyone. The world is clear, and we are in broad daylight, so we have to clear up all the grievances between us. As the Great Celestial Emperors of the 3 realms, we will uphold justice for you." Reverend Shojua shook his right hand, which was bleeding profusely, and suddenly laughed coldly. Reverend Dei squinted at the 6 great celestial emperors, who were surrounded by millions of celestial soldiers, and also laughed mockingly. The faces of the many Buddhist saints turned extremely unsightly. Had these 6 great celestial emperors gone mad? At this critical juncture, Reverend Shojua and Reverend Dei suddenly swayed, and they could not help but smile wildly. They sensed a very familiar aura suddenly appearing, and it was so close to them. That incomparably familiar aura was right above their heads, no more than 10,000 miles away. For almighty experts like them, this distance was no different from face to face. Wu Qi was back. He had come out of the 7 Holiness Palace, and he had returned to Panga World. Reverend Shojua and Reverend Dei were reassured. Immediately, Reverend Dei swung his arms and walked up to the 6 great celestial emperors. Chapter 1157. The sky is blue, the sea is blue, the grass is green, and the flowers are red. I'm in a great mood. Standing tens of thousands of miles high in the sky, Ao Buzan sat lazily on a dark cloud, throwing his head back and roaring with great interest. Surrounded by restrictive spells cast by Wu Qi, no matter how loud he screamed, he was not afraid that someone would hear him. Immortal Jade Bones sat gently next to Ao Buzan, slowly massaging his shoulders. Ao Buzan narrowed his eyes comfortably, his body twisting like an earthworm. Wu Qi and his company were also taking deep breaths, wearing relaxed smiles on their faces, as well as the joy of escaping from death. They had finally left the 7 Holies Palace. There were countless restrictive spells, countless obstacles, and countless criticisms, but Wu Qi had led them all the way out. But those chaotic creatures who had joined Wu Qi and his companions were completely wiped out because of Wu Qi's many mistakes. When the last Lao AI was completely wiped out, Wu Qi wisely led them out of the Seven Holies Palace. The harvest was great enough, and they could not risk the lives of their own people. They did not feel it when they were outside, but after escaping from the Seven Holies Palace, they realized that the scenery on Panga continent was so beautiful, the air was so fresh, and the flowers, plants, and trees were so beautiful. Before they knew it, they had gotten used to living here, and had regarded it as some kind of refuge. Subconsciously, Wu Qi thought that maybe he should do his best to fight against the world breakers, so that they could not destroy Panga world as well. Not only was Panga continent here, but also his old friends, and even the mortal world, the hometown that he was familiar with. This world contained far too many of his memories, and he absolutely could not allow them to be destroyed so easily. Looking down, he saw esteemed Shoujua and Supremacy Great Yi trying to get close to the 6 celestial emperors, who were arguing with the 18 revered ones of the Buddhist League, accusing them of violating Daozu's decree by attacking esteemed Shoujua rashly. While arguing, the 6 celestial emperors still had enough time to express their goodwill to Supremacy Great Yi, and their words clearly showed their intention to recruit him. Supremacy Great Yi waved his hands and feet like a robber, taking advantage of the fact that the 6 celestial emperors were trying to recruit him, and he kept pushing all the blame to the revered ones. In his opinion, these revered ones were a group of shameless bald donkeys, and all the sins were caused by them. As for him, the Yi Supremacy, he was the purest and kindest person in the world. The disappearance of the purple-eyed soul-suppressing Bodhisattva's son had absolutely nothing to do with him. Interesting. Wu Qi undid the restrictive spell, and the group slowly flew down on a cloud. Ninetails waved his long tail and pincers joyfully. In his little memory, he thought that Wu Qi was going to hunt the 6 great celestial emperors and the 18 revered Buddhas. These people looked delicious. Ninetail's mouth began to secrete rapidly again, and large streams of saliva kept dripping down his cheeks. With so many almighty experts present, someone soon discovered the whereabouts of Wu Qi and his companions. Everyone looked up warily. The faces of the 6 celestial emperors changed slightly, and the faces of the revered ones did not look any better. They all knew Wu Qi, the former king of East Sea of Diyu, who had caused them countless troubles at the beginning of the War of Gods investiture, especially when the Ling dynasty, which was controlled by the Dao League, was utterly defeated by the East Sea. The 6 celestial emperors still remembered that. But today, Wu Qi and the people around him gave off an unfathomable feeling. Whether it was the Tao Divine Eyes or the Buddhist Dharma Eyes, no matter how hard the 6 celestial emperors and the revered ones tried, they could not see through Wu Qi and his companions. Even Tu Xiaobai and Yuan Qing, who stood beside Wu Qi, seemed to be shrouded in a faint layer of mist, blocking their line of sight. Everyone gasped at the same time. Only Lord Shoujua and Supremacy De Yi cupped their fists and bowed to Wu Qi. Wu Qi hurriedly returned the greeting and said with a smile, "It's a pleasant surprise to meet you two here. I heard that fellow Taoist Shoujua is already a celestial emperor, and fellow Taoist Great Yi is also a Buddhist mountain master. Why are you here?" "Ah, ha ha ha." While Wu Qi was laughing, the celestial emperors and revered ones were exchanging glances. They vaguely sensed that something out of control was about to happen. Suddenly, great celestial emperor Yuanzhen burst into laughter. He nodded to Wu Qi and said, "I'm Wu Qi, king of East Sea. I haven't seen you for some time." With a surprised cry, Wu Qi nodded to great celestial emperor Yuanzhen with a smile and said, "Greetings, your majesties, I'm Wu Qi, an idler from the secular world. May I know how to address you, your majesties? Please forgive me if I've been rude." He then nodded at the Buddhist revered ones and said, "The revered ones are also ordinary. I wonder what your Dharma names are. If there is any disrespect, everyone here is a great virtue of the Buddhist sect, so your hearts must be broad. You will definitely not take it to heart if there is any slight disrespect." After laughing for a while, Wu Qi continued to get closer to Reverend Shoujua. Both of them were talking and laughing happily, and soon, they were so close to each other that their eyes were almost filled with pink chicken hearts. Anyone could tell at a glance that they had fallen in love with each other and were about to become lovers. Their nonchalant attitude greatly displeased the celestial emperors and revered ones. But, as they were all shrewd men, they just looked at Wu Qi with a smile on their faces, wondering why Wu Qi would suddenly appear at this critical juncture, and why they could not see through his cultivation base. Could it be that he and the people around him had some fortuitous encounter and found some treasures that could conceal their auras? But, why was he trying to curry favor with esteemed Shoujua? Before the celestial emperors and revered ones could figure out what was at stake, Wu Qi had already bowed deeply to esteemed Shoujua and said, "The great Tao of heaven has been settled, and the position of God has been determined. Diyu is already a thing of the past. Wu Qi just wants to find a place where he can earn a salary and support his family. I wonder if your majesty can give Wu Qi a chance. As long as your majesty is willing to accept Wu Qi and all my friends and relatives, I will gladly take up an idle position in the civil service." Suddenly, great celestial Emperor Yuanjun felt his back go numb, and countless hairs on his body stood on end. "This is ridiculous. You are a subject of Diyu. How can you join the celestial court?" he cried out almost instinctively. Esteemed Shoujua twitched his mouth, tilted his head, and sneered, "This is ridiculous. How can your majesties interfere with my government affairs? I've long heard that Wu Qi, king of East Sea, is wise, and virtuous. I happen to be in need of a mighty god who can rule over the mountains, rivers, water, and land, and supervise all the city gods, land gods, mountain gods, water gods, and all the gods on Pangu continent for me. I wonder if the king of East Sea can condescend to this position." Not allowing the 6 great celestial emperors to object, Wu Qi had already accepted the appointment from esteemed Shoujua. "That's great. Your Majesty, just hand over the position to Wu Qi, and I'll make sure that all the city gods, land gods, mountain gods, and water gods are obedient, and no one dares to jump out and make trouble." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and let out a creepy laugh. Great Yi grinned and cried out, "Wonderful. A bunch of damned people are in a hurry to slander me. I can't stay in the Buddhist League any longer. Hee, your Majesty Shoujua, it's no different from herding a sheep or releasing a flock of sheep. Why don't you take me in as well?" Esteemed Shoujua clapped his hands and laughed so hard that his eyes narrowed into a line. He nodded happily and said, "Wonderful. Fellow Taoist Great Yi, you can be my marshal of evil slaying, and you'll be in charge of all my immortal soldiers and generals." The faces of the celestial emperors and the revered ones changed dramatically. What the celestial emperors thought was that since both Wu Qi and Great Yi had taken refuge with esteemed Shoujua, the latter's overall strength would be greatly enhanced, and he would be qualified to fight for power in the celestial court. They could not understand why Wu Qi and esteemed Shoujua suddenly hooked up with each other as if they knew each other in their previous lives. Moreover, esteemed Shoujua had taken in Wu Qi just like that. Wasn't he afraid of his loyalty at all? What the revered ones thought was that if Great Yi took refuge with the Tao League and really became the marshal of evil slaying under the heaven and earth, they would be overjoyed. When the Buddha came out of seclusion and found that purple-eyed spirit-suppressing bodhisattva, many arhats, jedi, and heavenly kings were dead, and Great Yi had become the Taoist League's ox nose. Moreover, no one had taken the blame for all this. Were they going to take the blame themselves? World-revered Coffin, who had just been smashed into the dust by great celestial Emperor Yuanjun's seal, flew back shakily, and shouted, "This is ridiculous. Great Yi, how dare you betray the Buddhist League? Shoujua, how dare you take in a traitor of the Buddhist League? Are you trying to go against the Buddhist League? Get lost." A black shadow flashed by, and Ao Buzan suddenly tore through the void and appeared in front of world-revered Coffin. He slapped world-revered Coffin across the face and sent him flying hundreds of miles away. He spun and crashed into a huge mountain. A long row of 7-colored teeth spurted out from Coffin World's Venerable's mouth. Under the sunlight, these teeth were shining brightly, looking extraordinarily beautiful. Ao Buzan shouted, "Stop talking nonsense here. Does one have to be a monk for the rest of his life after being a monk for one day? Is your Buddhist league a place of peace and quiet, or a fucking brothel? Do you not allow people to be good? Great E Supremacy was so angry that his teeth hurt. What did he mean by being good? Why were Ao Buzan's words so unpleasant to the ear? The other celestial emperors and world-revered ones were stunned by Ao Buzan's slap. Just now, when Ao Buzan slapped, world-revered Coffin's face had clearly flashed with a Buddhist light. Clearly, world-revered Coffin had made a timely defense. But Ao Buzan's slap had shattered his protective Buddhist light and sent his teeth flying. What kind of strength was this? This was different from Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjin's sneak attack. That was a sneak attack that knocked world-revered Coffin unconscious. This time, Ao Buzan was facing the enemy head-on. He had sent a peak Dao breaking realm revered ones flying. Could it be that Ao Buzan already had a Dao fusing realm cultivation base? All the celestial emperors and world-revered ones began to tremble. If Ao Buzan really had a Dao fusing realm cultivation base, what about Wu Qi and the others? Wu Qi, Princess Zhanglu, Yi Xia, Ao Buzan, Lord Xiansheng, Catfish, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Gold Feather, Silver Feather, Tu Xiaobai, Yuan Qing, and a nine-tailed scorpion. None of them could see through the cultivation base of these 13 people. Could it be that they all had the same cultivation base? Then, they saw a Reverend Shou Zhuo burst into laughter. With Wu Qi's introduction, he invited all the people around Wu Qi to his seat as if there was no one else around him, and conferred them with divine positions on the spot. For example, Ao Buzan had become the water saint under Reverend Shou Zhuo, the water god responsible for supervising all the oceans and lakes on Pangu continent. The 6 celestial emperors felt dizzy. How were they going to end this? How dare you, Reverend Shou Zhuo? Chapter 1158. The World Lord of the Outer Coffin, who was as famous as the World Lord of the Outer Coffin, was shocked for a moment, then flew into a rage. He rubbed his hands together and released them. A Buddhist light the size of a human head shot out, within which were 3 tiny Vajra pestles that spun rapidly. From time to time, the heavy chanting of the 6 syllables of the Buddhist League could be heard. The 3 pestles were only as long as a palm and as thick as a thumb. They were green in color and had a bit of mildew on them, as if they were carved from the wood of an ancient coffin. The magical artifacts of the Buddhist League usually emanated a grand and solemn aura, but these 3 pestles carried an aura of nirvana that could make one feel dead and despairing. The World Lord of the Outer Coffin and the World Lord of the Outer Coffin were a pair of coffins of the Buddhist League. They cultivated the Tao of nirvana, breaking the samsara of nirvana to obtain the great divine abilities. Therefore, their Zen techniques were very different from the other World Lords. Normally, they would use the golden light and auspicious cloud of the Buddhist League's arrows, but when they used their ultimate techniques, they would emit an aura of death and dusk. They didn't look like eminent monks of the Buddhist League, but more like evil fiends. The light ball pierced through the void and struck heavily on Ao Buzan's chest. Ao Buzan gave a strange laugh. His shirt was torn to pieces, revealing the 3 thick layers of dragon scales on his chest. He whistled proudly and wriggled his lower body at the World Lord of the Outer Coffin in a wretched manner. The 3 pestles struck the dragon scales and let out a mournful wail. The dragon scales on Ao Buzan's body stood up as if the pestles had struck a blade. The pestles were made from the primordial divine wood extracted from the World Lord of the Outer Coffin's body, but they were cut into sticks by the scales on Ao Buzan's body. Green and moldy wooden strips fell down with a mournful wail. The World Lord of the Outer Coffin's body swayed and a stream of green blood slowly trickled down from the corner of his mouth. The expressions of the other Buddhist world venerables changed. Chi-Chi raised his hand and was about to attack Ao Buzan. A long howl came from afar. World Venerable Coffin, who was sent flying by Ao Buzan, flew back while holding his face that was swollen like a pig's head. He softly shouted to stop his fellow disciples' impulsive actions and glared at Ao Buzan. Then, he coldly asked De, are you really going to betray Buddhism? De Supremacy glared as he swung his huge peachwood sword and sneered, if I don't leave Buddhism, I will be sent to be your blade. Do you really think I'm stupid? You want me to go fight those world breakers by myself? If you dare to use the method of killing with a borrowed knife to deal with me, this Taoist grandpa will give you a head full of shit. Laughing into the sky, Supremacy De shook his head and said arrogantly, when Buddha comes out of his seclusion, you can explain to him. Let's see if Buddha will believe your words. Bah, how much has Lao Tzu done for Buddhism? Would Lao Tzu collude with the demons of the outer domain to plot against Buddhist disciples? Your brains aren't filled with brain matter, but a pile of dog shit, right? Amidst the wild laughter, esteemed Shozhua slowly cupped his hands and bowed to the 6 celestial emperors. Then, he proudly took Wu Qi and De Supremacy's hands and entered his chariot. The 1,000,000 immortals who served esteemed Shozhua were singing the lyrics of Taoist love in high spirits as they rode the clouds and escorted the chariot straight to the southern heaven gate. When the chariot passed by the 6 celestial emperors, Wu Qi deliberately raised his voice and said, Your Majesty, these days, Wu Qi has found a lot of spirit herbs in the chaos. If they are refined into spirit pills, it will be enough to make the immortal arts under your Majesty's command improve greatly. As long as your Majesty can have hundreds of more primordial immortals and hundreds of thousands of golden immortals, your Majesty's position as the Celestial Emperor will be secure. The 6 celestial emperors almost vomited blood. Hundreds of primordial immortals and hundreds of thousands of golden immortals. No matter how many gold immortals there were, the celestial emperors would not take them seriously. But, hundreds of primordial immortals would definitely destroy the balance of the entire celestial court. If esteemed Shozhua suddenly had hundreds of primordial immortals under his command, how could the other celestial emperors survive? Whether Wu Qi was telling the truth or not, as long as there was a slight possibility, esteemed Shozhua could not be allowed to have so many formidable immortals. The celestial emperor's procession rose into the sky and hurried toward the southern heavenly gate. Coffin World and Coffin World exchanged a glance, whispered a few words, and then hurried back to Mount Gajrakota as if their butts were on fire. While the celestial emperors were busy dealing with esteemed Shozhua, whose power had suddenly skyrocketed, the world exalts were in even greater trouble. Not only had they failed to kill De with a borrowed knife, but they had also allowed the boer to seek refuge with the Tao League. How were they going to clean up this mess? With their minds occupied, the celestial emperor's procession slowed down a lot. By the time they rushed out of the astral wind zone at the highest point of Panga continent, Wu Qi and his company had already arrived outside the southern heavenly gate. But, the southern heavenly gate looked very strange today. The 8 heavenly kings stood in a straight line behind the gate, and the huge gate was shrouded in a soft immortal light. A faintly discernible golden gate stood in front of everyone, emanating a powerful energy fluctuation that made it impossible for anyone to approach. Originally, the southern heavenly gate only had a white jade gateway that stood about 10,000 feet tall, with some attached palaces and pavilions on both sides. But, once this golden gate appeared, it meant that the southern heavenly gate was completely closed, and the passage between the 33 heavens and the outside world was cut off. Clad in the imperial robe, esteemed Shozhua walked out of the chariot with a gloomy face. Staring at the southern heavenly gate, he snapped, What are you doing? Why are you closing the southern heavenly gate for no reason? Open the gate now and let me in. Not only were the 8 heavenly kings guarding the southern heavenly gate, but also 3,000 immortal generals and 1,000,000 immortal soldiers. Upon hearing esteemed Shozhua's rebuke, the heavenly king of state guarding, who was the leader of the 8 heavenly kings, walked out slowly and said slowly, Please forgive me, your majesty. This is an edict jointly signed by 6 great celestial emperors. The 4 heavenly gates are closed to prevent the invasion of fiends. After a brief pause, the heavenly king of state guarding said with a strange smile, If not for the joint edict of 6 great celestial emperors, I would not dare to open the southern heavenly gate. Esteemed Shozhua flew into a rage. He stomped his feet and growled, How dare you? They have jointly ordered the southern heavenly gate to be closed. Why can't I go in? The heavenly king of state guarding slowly walked out from behind the heavenly king of state guarding. He gently patted the Qilin statue carved on the Qilin heart protection mirror on his chest and said slowly, Please forgive me, your majesty. The edict of 6 great celestial emperors is more important than the edict of 1 great celestial emperor. The southern heavenly gate cannot be opened easily. Of course, if your majesty is willing to let all your subjects and your majesty pass the examination of the demon-revealing mirror, we can make an exception this time. Esteemed Shou Zhuo's face darkened. On one side of the southern heavenly gate, there was a small side door. On the left and right sides of the door were the 4 divine beast talismans of the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise. Above the lintel of the door hung a basin-sized green mirror, shining brightly. This was the demon-revealing mirror, a divine tool of the celestial court created by the heavenly Tao after the deity positions of the celestial court were settled. This demon-revealing mirror was condensed from the power of the great Tao of Panga world, and contained an infinite amount of divine power. Even if one was a Tao-fusing cultivator, the mirror would be able to see through any illusionary magic that was cast by it. It was a divine tool that even mighty figures of the Tao-fusing stage couldn't escape. If esteemed Shou Zhuo was willing to let his 1 million troops enter through the side door, he could avoid the danger of the breakers sneaking in. However, the problem was not so simple. Esteemed Shou Zhuo was also one of the celestial emperors of the celestial court. If he yielded to the 8 heavenly kings, no one would listen to him in the celestial court in the future. How could a celestial emperor enter the celestial court through the side door? Didn't that mean that he was the son of a concubine? Esteemed Shou Zhuo's face darkened. The 8 heavenly kings were deliberately making trouble for him. Closing the 4 heavenly gates to prevent demons from invading was all a lie. Only humiliating esteemed Shou Zhuo was the real deal. The 8 heavenly kings wanted to humiliate him and completely strike at esteemed Shou Zhuo's dignity. A deathly silence reigned both inside and outside the southern heavenly gate. The 8 heavenly kings and esteemed Shou Zhuo stared at each other across the gate. Both sides were expressionless, and the troops under their command were as still as clay sculptures. No one dared to make a sound. The million immortals under esteemed Shou Zhuo's command gritted their teeth. They were all small immortal sects and itinerant cultivators who relied on esteemed Shou Zhuo for protection. Now that esteemed Shou Zhuo had been humiliated like this, if he really gave in today, they would have no future in the celestial court. Instead of being bullied and oppressed in the celestial court, they would rather flee to Panga continent and live a free life. In the deathly silence, Wu Qi suddenly laughed. Hee hee, interesting. So, this is the legendary demon-revealing mirror? Wu Qi laughed and reached out his hand to the small door on the east side of the southern heavenly gate. 5 beams of light shone out of his fingers. They did not look powerful, but they gave off a sense of extreme danger. A vast amount of immortal light poured out of the southern heavenly gate as the 8 heavenly kings roared in unison, "Who are you, evildoer? How dare you?" Before they could finish, all 8 heavenly kings were struck dumb. They were scared silly by Wu Qi. 5 beams of light flew out, and the immortal light emitting from the southern heavenly gate melted rapidly like snow under the sun, turning into countless tiny specks that drifted in all directions. The beams of light unleashed by Wu Qi easily grabbed the demon-revealing mirror, wrapped it up, and flew back to his side. After catching the mirror, Wu Qi held it up and shone it at the 8 heavenly kings. He injected a bit of holy power into the demon-revealing mirror and said with a smile, "You're just gatekeepers, yet you dare to block the path of the Tao ancestors' celestial emperor. If you're not demons, then who is?" Under the control of the holy power, the demon-revealing mirror let out an uneasy and terrified moan. The surface of the mirror suddenly shook, and a blinding blue light shot out. The blue light struck the southern heavenly gate like a bolt of lightning, colliding with the immortal light emitted by the southern heavenly gate. With a loud bang, dozens of glaring cracks suddenly appeared on the memorial arch of the southern heavenly gate. Several huge pieces of jade fell from the memorial arch, smashing into the heads of the heavenly soldiers behind them and causing them to bleed. The demon-revealing mirror let out a sad cry, and a few glaring cracks also appeared on it. The southern heavenly gate's arch was also a divine artifact of the celestial court formed by the heavenly axiom after the celestial emperor was conferred. It had the same origin as the demon-revealing mirror. When Wu Qi used his holy power to force the demon-revealing mirror to clash head-on with the southern heavenly gate, it was like two eggs crashing into each other. Both sides were severely injured. The 8 heavenly kings almost fainted. This was a divine artifact of the heavenly axiom, yet it was severely injured by Wu Qi. The stake guardian heavenly king pointed a trembling finger at Wu Qi and screamed, "Men, take this monster down." Before he could finish, Wu Qi also yelled, "Men, chase these snobs away and prepare a ceremonial battle. His Majesty is returning to the palace." Millions of immortals cheered in unison, "His Majesty is returning to the palace." Countless sword beams crashed into the southern heavenly gate like raindrops. Chapter 1159. The atmosphere in the 33 heavens had become very strange. The great celestial emperor suddenly had a group of ferocious subordinates, and one of them, a man named Wu Qi, was able to break the southern heavenly gate and seize the demon-revealing mirror all by himself. But Wu Qi was not the scariest. What was more frightening was a man named Ao Buzan and a supremacy called Great E. These two ferocious men had broken the limbs of the 8 heavenly kings in front of the southern heavenly gate, and nearly destroyed their divine bodies. But Ao Buzan and supremacy were only fears to the 8 heavenly kings, and the strangest was the woman named Princess Zhanglu, Ji Zixuan. It was said that when 1,000,000 heavenly soldiers formed a battle array to besiege the immortals under the great celestial emperor, Princess Zhanglu sprinkled a handful of 100 herbs powder and knocked out Chi-Chi. Everyone, from gold immortals to heaven immortals, was unconscious for a day and a night before they slowly regained consciousness. It was incredible that 1,000,000 heavenly soldiers and generals who were conferred the title of God of the heavenly Tao were knocked out by a handful of 100 herbs powder. Not only that, the cruelest one had to be the girl named Catfish Flood Dragon. She brought a strange scorpion with her, and 4 young boys and girls with tender skin, and they opened their mouths and swallowed living people. At least thousands of heavenly soldiers and generals were devoured by them, leaving only Yuan Ling, who had returned to the list of deification, to wait helplessly for his divine body to reform in the deification pool in the celestial court. Although it was scary to eat living people, many heavenly soldiers and generals had done it before they ascended to immortality, so it was not too shocking. Only Lord Xiansheng, together with a female rabbit demon and a monkey demon, stood in front of Grand Emperor Huang Xingtian. Dozens of heavenly kings and spirit officers who had rushed to the southern heavenly gate as reinforcements were beaten to a pulp, and 100,000 elite heavenly soldiers were routed and fled. The monkey demon had flattened a few of Grand Emperor Huang Xingtian's most important halls with a single swing of his stick, causing him to suffer heavy losses. Even after such a group of fierce men had sought refuge with great celestial emperor, the 6 celestial emperors did not say a word about it when they returned to the celestial court. The situation was so strange that all the immortals and deities of the celestial court had to be cautious. Some of the more sensitive immortals and immortal officials who were not from the lineal immortal sects of Tao League had a vague feeling that the situation in the celestial court was about to change. On the 3rd day after Wu Qi and his company broke through the southern heavenly gate, Wu Qi changed into a gorgeous celestial lord's robe and left Grand Emperor Huang Xingtian with Ao Buzan and Supremacy Great E, heading straight for the 33 heavens. Along the way, they deliberately slowed down their speed and flew slowly over the path of clouds that connected the heavens. So, all the immortals in the 33 heavens knew that the 3 ferocious men whom great celestial emperor had recruited had gone to the 33 heavens. Each of the 33 heavens of the celestial court was connected by a heavenly gate, which was guarded by heavenly generals and soldiers. When Wu Qi and his company arrived at the highest heavenly gate of the 33 heavens, the heavenly kings, generals, and soldiers guarding the gate all looked at them with sullen expressions. No one greeted them, and no one asked why they were there. It was as if the 3 of them did not exist. Wu Qi did not waste any time. He knew that the battle at the southern heavenly gate had spread their notoriety throughout the entire celestial court. Today, he was here to make himself even more notorious, so he was in no mood to bicker with these heavenly kings and generals. With their heads held high and their hands clasped behind their backs, the 3 of them passed through the heavenly gate and headed straight for the Hall of Enlightenment. Along the way, countless immortals saw where they were heading, and instantly, all kinds of messenger spirit talismans flew everywhere. The news that Wu Qi and his company were heading to the Hall of Enlightenment instantly spread throughout the 33 heavens. The Hall of Enlightenment was right in front of them. A group of spirit officers, heavenly masters, generals, and heavenly kings, who were guarding the Hall of Enlightenment, were ready to fight. The aura of soldiers rushed out from all directions. Clearly, there were many heavenly soldiers and generals lying in ambush inside and outside the Hall of Enlightenment. Wu Qi cackled. He did not go to the Hall of Enlightenment. Instead, he walked to a row of pavilions on the west side of the Hall of Enlightenment. The Hall of Enlightenment was the place where Great Sky King Yuanzhen gathered all the saints to discuss important matters. It was the true core of the celestial court. Wu Qi did not want to destroy the Hall of Enlightenment. At least, before the world breaker was suppressed again, he could not disturb the path of heaven of Panga world. However, the row of palaces and pavilions on the west side of the Hall of Enlightenment was the daily office of the immortal departments of the celestial court. All the affairs of the 33 heavens, such as the distribution of mansions of the divine generals, the shortage of servants and maids in the mansions of the celestial lords, and the need to change the mounts of the divine generals, etc., were basically all gathered here. At this moment, there were immortal officers craning their necks in front of the doors of each office, looking around. Wu Qi and his company walked slowly through the offices. When the immortal officers saw Wu Qi and his company walk past their own doors, they could not help but wipe the cold sweat off their foreheads. These three were powerful figures who had almost torn down the southern heavenly gate and robbed the demon-revealing mirror, but had not been punished by anyone. Even the 6 celestial emperors did not punish them for such a serious crime. So, even if they beat him up or killed him, there would not be any consequences, would there? Slowly, he walked past one luxurious and magnificent pavilion after another. Suddenly, he stopped in front of the entrance of the government office. A few purple-robed immortal officers standing behind the wide gate screamed and fled into the building when they saw the 3 of them stop in front of their own door. Wu Qi grinned, strolling leisurely into the office. He passed through the spacious courtyard and came to the main hall of the office. The immortal officer in charge of the government office, Immortal Green Melon, was a peak-level gold immortal, a direct disciple of great celestial emperor Yuanzhen. According to seniority, he was the 7th-generation grand disciple of great celestial emperor Yuanzhen. Immortal Green Melon worked diligently and meticulously. Before he became a god, he was in charge of the construction and distribution of various pavilions and mansions in great celestial emperor Yuanzhen's Badamanda. As the name suggested, the government office was in charge of the construction and distribution of the pavilions and mansions in the 33 heavens of the celestial court. For example, Celestial Lord Heavenly Origin was a new celestial lord after he became a god, and he was the leader of all celestial lords. The government office was located in Pingyu Jiaitian, who had chosen a land with a circumference of 1,000 miles, where he built his mansion. Jiaitian was the 32nd celestial emperor of the 33 heavens, and the natural energy he had was 10,000 times denser than that of the first heaven, Wangzhengtian. After the investiture of gods, the celestial heavens gained countless divine beings out of nowhere. These newly promoted divine beings all needed offices and mansions for their dependents. All divine beings wanted a mansion in a higher realm of heaven. Therefore, the government office was a very important position. If Immortal Green Melon was not a direct disciple of great celestial emperor Yuanzhen, he would never have been given this position. Seeing Wu Qi and his companions stride in, the expression of Immortal Green Melon, who was sitting behind the desk, flickered slightly. Then, he gave an indifferent snort, looked at Wu Qi coldly, and asked, "May I know what business you have with me, my lord?" Wu Qi looked Immortal Green Melon up and down. He was not tall, and was slightly plump. His round face was round and chubby, without any sharp edges. Clearly, he was a very cunning and shrewd man. He nodded and walked slowly to the desk. He took the scroll from Immortal Green Melon's hand and threw it on the desk, then said slowly, "Nothing important. I just want to ask Immortal Monarch to choose the best land in the heaven of 3 pure ones for us. We need to build a few mansions." Immortal Green Melon smiled, narrowed his eyes, and sighed. "What are you talking about, my lord. The heaven of three pure ones is where the palaces of the 6 emperors are, and countless colleagues of the celestial court wish to have a mansion in the heaven of three pure ones. But there are too many monks and not enough gruel. The heaven of three pure ones has long been divided, and even celestial Lord Heavenly Origin can only build a mansion in Pingyu Jiaitian. Could it be that my lord has a higher status than celestial Lord Heavenly Origin? Wu Qi said nothing but smiled. Then, Dei Supremacy and Ao Buzan, Chi took a step forward, threw out a left fist, and punched Immortal Green Melon's eyes. Immortal Green Melon's cultivation base was at the peak of Gold Immortal Realm, and Dei Supremacy was at the peak of Dao Breaking Realm, while Ao Buzan's cultivation base was far beyond Dao Breaking Realm. How could Immortal Green Melon stand a chance against them? Immortal Green Melon's vision darkened, and then a sharp pain struck him. He howled miserably, covered his eyes with both hands, and almost cried. After a few screams, Immortal Green Melon forced his eyes open, glared at Wu Qi, and howled at the top of his voice, "How dare you beat a righteous god of the celestial court?" Wu Qi waved his hand and said coolly, "Beat him, keep beating him." Ao Buzan dragged Immortal Green Melon out from behind the desk and threw him heavily on the ground. Supremacy de Yi laughed strangely as he stuck a 5 Mountains Vajra talisman on Immortal Green Melon's back. Immortal Green Melon felt a huge force pressing down on him. Not only could he not move his body, even the immortal energy in his body was frozen. He lay stiffly on the ground, watching as Ao Buzan and Dei Supremacy raised their huge feet. Deep, muffled noises kept ringing out from the hall of the government office, and Immortal Green Melon howled miserably. Ao Buzan and Dei Supremacy did not hit accurately, so with just a few kicks, more than half of Immortal Green Melon's bones were broken. Even though he was now a god conferred by the heavenly Tao, and as long as Yuan Ling was not destroyed, he could be reborn again and again, the pain in his body could not be removed. Immortal Green Melon screamed in pain, then suddenly cried out, "Help!" The government office was the General Affairs Office of the Celestial Court, and not one of the powerful departments of the Celestial Court, such as water, fire, wind, and thunder. Although the immortals in the government office were skilled in government affairs, they were not good at fighting. A few immortal officials rushed into the hall, trying to save their chief official, but Ao Buzan gave them a slap on the face, knocking them out before they could even make a sound. Wu Qi squatted in front of Immortal Green Melon and said slowly, "A few years ago, it was you, Immortal Monarch, who said that there was only an empty space in Taihuang Huangzhengtian, so His Majesty's temporary imperial residence was arranged in Taihuang Huangzhengtian." Grabbing Immortal Green Melon's hair, Wu Qi slammed it against the ground and roared, "Bullshit! The temporary imperial residences of the 6 celestial emperors are all in the heaven of 3 pure ones, and only His Majesty's temporary imperial residence is arranged in Taihuang Huangzhengtian. What? Isn't His Majesty the celestial emperor conferred by the Daozu himself?" Drawing out a Kunwu sword and placing it against Immortal Green Melon's neck, Wu Qi sneered and said, "Heaven of 3 pure ones, you better finish the construction of the temporary imperial residence within 1,000,000 miles in circumference within 3 months. Otherwise, I will wipe out your entire clan, and I guarantee that no one related to you by blood will be able to escape. Do you believe me or not?" The sound of armors rubbing against each other echoed out, as a golden-armored heavenly general stormed into the government office with several hundred celestial soldiers. The heavenly general opened his mouth and was about to scold Wu Qi, but Wu Qi swung his sword backhandedly and shattered all the armors worn by the hundreds of celestial soldiers. Their limbs were sent flying high into the air, and all of them fell to the ground, wailing and howling. Immortal Green Melon trembled and dared not to make another sound. Chapter 1160. Somewhere at the top of the 33 heavens. From here, one could overlook the dazzling translucent palace thousands of miles away, as well as the palace of great celestial Emperor Yuanzhen not far away. Under an ancient pine tree at the top of the mountain, a few gray-haired old immortals were sitting on stone stools, drinking tea and chatting, while great celestial Emperor Yuanzhen and great celestial Emperor Yuanzhen, clad in light green robes, were playing chess beside a rockery. The black and white pieces slowly landed on the chessboard, while the 2 celestial emperors wore calm expressions, just like the sky above their heads. When the game was about to end, Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun said indifferently, "Shouju's strength has increased greatly, which is a problem for us." Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun sighed softly, narrowed his eyes, and said, "If we can't defeat him, we can only help him up. Otherwise, Daozu's side will lose face. But, the 6 of us are not willing to help him up. Why should the power of the Celestial Court be given to an outsider like him? But, it seems a little difficult to defeat him now." After pondering for a long time and failing to make a move, Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun said softly, "How about giving him some real power?" Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun's expression flickered as he shook his head and said, "We can't do that. It would have been fine if we had given him some real power a few days ago, but now that Wu Qi and Supremacy Day have joined him, they are a group of scourges. If we give him even a little power now, those bastards will immediately climb up to us and ask for more power." Gritting his teeth, Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun said with a cold grin, "Do you remember what happened to Zhang Tingyun in the Ling dynasty? Wu Qi, the king of East Sea, is not a pushover, and he has the shadow of the Huang clan behind him. Who knows what he will do? As for Supremacy Day, that boor." Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun could not help but smile bitterly when he thought of what Supremacy Day had done. He shook his head and said, "He is indeed a boor. The Buddhist League has been greatly deceived by him, and now he has grown long hair and joined the Taoist League. What should we do? Don't tell me you can eliminate him." At the last sentence, the 2 great celestial emperors exchanged a glance, then looked at the few white-haired old immortals sitting beside them at the same time. The immortals exchanged glances and shook their heads. Although their cultivation base was profound and their magic power was boundless, they knew they were no match for a Buddhist almighty expert at the peak of the Tao-breaking realm. To defeat a Tao-breaking pinnacle existence, perhaps 2 or 3 people of equal strength could defeat him. To defeat a Tao-breaking pinnacle existence, 4 or 5 people of equal strength and equipped with offensive magical treasures of the same grade were needed. But to kill a great unity venerable, a Tao-breaking pinnacle existence would not be so easy to kill without a dozen people working together and setting up a formation beforehand. How could a Tao-breaking pinnacle existence be so easy to kill? Furthermore, Supremacy De had the Vajra scepter and the 7 treasures Kasaya that were jointly refined by the 7 Buddhas to protect him. He might even have many Buddhist treasures that were personally bestowed by the Buddhas. How could it be easy to kill someone whose cultivation, mana, and treasures were all top-notch? I can't even kill him with a borrowed knife. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun smacked his lips and sighed in distress. The Buddhas wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife. They wanted Supremacy De to fight a world breaker head-on. And the result? In the end, Supremacy De turned against the Buddhas. Not only did he bring all his people away from Spirit Vulture Mountain, but he also caused purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva to chase him all the way to the Chan Naga Monastery. In the end, some damned world breakers suddenly attacked and killed countless of the Buddhas. He's a pain in the neck. He's not easy to deal with. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun also found it difficult to deal with. Wu Qi and Supremacy De were both supreme-grade figures. Next to Wu Qi, Ao Buzan was the reincarnation of Arko Zhu Long. His cultivation base aside, he now controlled the entire dragons. The 2 great celestial emperors suddenly felt like cursing. How could people like Wu Qi and Supremacy De be enemies with esteemed Shoujua? They looked at each other. The 2 of them sighed at the same time. They shook their heads, then nodded. They had already come to a conclusion. If they were Wu Qi or Supremacy De, and they were going to join a faction in the Celestial Court, they would choose the weakest faction in the Celestial Court. It was obvious that joining a powerful Sky King would result in a conflict with his original faction. No matter how much effort they put in, they would not be able to get many benefits. However, if he joined the weakest Celestial Emperor, since he was the weakest, which meant that he didn't have many subordinates, he would be able to get a high position as soon as he joined the Celestial Emperor. After that, as long as he could snatch enough resources, no matter how much he snatched, it would be his. They sighed. The 2 of them felt a bit regretful. They had suppressed esteemed Shojua too much. Otherwise, he would not have been able to take advantage of this. Just as the two of them were thinking about how to deal with esteemed Shojua, whose power had skyrocketed, a few immortal officials hurried over on clouds and shouted from afar, Your Majesty, that Wu Qi is so rude and unreasonable. He actually attacked the 33 heavens. The two celestial emperors' faces darkened. They had long known that Wu Qi had brought Ao Buzan and Supremacy de Yi to the 33 heavens, but they did not expect that they would actually dare to make a move. They looked at each other and quickly enveloped the entire 33 heavens with their divine senses. What happened in the government office next made them so angry that they almost vomited blood. Immortal Green Melon had been hung by Ao Buzan under the archway in front of the government office. He was stripped clean, and Supremacy de Yi was using his Vajra scepter to turn into a soft whip, whipping Immortal Green Melon with his bare arms. With Supremacy de Yi's divine strength, he could easily shatter the stars with a single whip. How could Immortal Green Melon withstand his lashes? The sound of the whip was ear-piercing. Every time Supremacy de Yi swung the whip, Immortal Green Melon would let out a shrill howl that sounded like a female wolf whose tail had been chopped off after the death of her pup. Every lash of the whip would take away a 1-foot-long, inch-deep, and thumb-thick piece of muscle from Immortal Green Melon's body. It was as if every lash was slashing Immortal Green Melon's body with a knife. But the most vicious thing was that with every lash, a Buddhist light would ripple out from the whip. The Zen technique of the Buddhist League was also very effective in treating external wounds. The wounds on Immortal Green Melon healed rapidly, and not even a drop of blood came out. By now, Supremacy de Yi had lashed Immortal Green Melon nearly 100 times, and his body was covered with these deep and long wounds. Many of the immortal officials were so shocked that they could only stare blankly. None of them dared to say a word to stop Immortal Green Melon. As for the hundreds of heavenly soldiers and generals in the government office, they were howling in pain as well, but their howls were definitely not as shrill and unpleasant as Immortal Green Melon's. Hundreds of them cried out in unison, attracting the attention of many heavenly soldiers and generals who were stationed in the 33 heavens. However, none of them dared to approach the government office. There were at least tens of thousands of dragon warriors clad in heavy armor and wielding immortal weapons guarding the road leading to the magistrate's office. Each of these dragons was 30 feet tall, and they had deliberately transformed into their dragon heads, as if they were afraid that no one would know who they were. Not only did they look like that, but there were also 4 Tao-breaking cultivators and 100 Tao-reasoning cultivators among the dragon warriors. The strongest among these heavenly soldiers and generals was only at the level of Gold Immortal. Who would dare to attack an army led by a Tao-breaking expert? Ao Buzan stood in front of the government office, his chest glowing with a golden light. Clearly, he had activated his interstitial world, and could summon more dragons at any time. This was Arko Zulong, the man who controlled all dragons in Panga world. God knew how many dragons he had prepared in his interstitial world. Dragons were a troublesome species. They might not be the strongest in Panga world, but their numbers were definitely the largest among all the divine and immortal beasts in Panga world. The Buddhist Celestial 8 divisions had a dragons department, and the Celestial Court had a special army of dragons. Most of the gods of rivers and lakes in Panga world were descendants of dragons. Following the principle of Ao Buzan, Arko Zulong, they had been trying their best to reproduce, although it was difficult for dragons to reproduce. While Qilin, White Tiger, Phoenix, Vermilion Bird, and other divine birds were strictly demanding the purity of their bloodlines, the dragon race had been conscientious for generations, not hesitating to sacrifice themselves to mix their bloodlines with other races that could possibly mix their bloodlines. Divine dragons, true dragons, sky dragons, flood dragons, chi dragons, coiling dragons, winged dragons, half dragons, and all kinds of dragons were a kind of dragons. During the god-deifying war, on a whim, Ao Buzan ordered all dragons in Panga world to go to the East Sea. By now, the enormous army of dragons was under Ao Buzan's control. How many dragons did Ao Buzan have under his command? Even Ao Buzan himself did not know, just as he did not know how many children he had now. In any case, all he cared about was planting seeds in the world, and he would never pay attention to the various disputes that would arise in the future. What a powerful army of dragons! What a terrifying Arco Zhu Long! Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen and Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's limbs twitched. Their expressions changed, and they almost vomited blood in anger. Dei didn't slap immortal green melon, but Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's face. What Ao Buzan brought was not an army of 10,000 dragons, but a blatant show of force and strength. A few immortal officials carefully told the two celestial emperors the excuse Wu Qi used to provoke them. Esteemed Shouzhua, the temporary imperial residence of Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen, had been arranged in Taihuang Huangzhengtian. As the most important minister under esteemed Shouzhua's command, Wu Qi had come to the celestial court with righteous indignation. The two celestial emperors were silent for a long time, and then Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen sighed coldly and said, "I'm afraid it will be difficult to suppress Shouzhua now. They are showing off their force. He, since when did the dragons have so many Tao-breaking elders?" Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen shook his head and said coolly, "Let's save Green Melon first, or that Dei will beat him to death." With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi stood in front of the gate of the government office, looking up at the sky with a smile on his face. Judging from his appearance, he seemed to be here for a banquet, not to cause trouble and beat people up. He could let Ao Buzan and Dei do whatever they wanted. In his interstitial world, the army of 10 million heavenly ghosts was ready, and if necessary, he did not mind making a bigger scene in front of the many celestial emperors of the celestial court. Suddenly, two streams of purple smoke flew over from a distance. It was Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen and Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen, Chi-Chi. Wu Qi smiled at the two celestial emperors, and the two celestial emperors looked back at him with smiles. After a moment of silence, Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen nodded and said, "Green Melon, find a blessed land in the three pure heaven and build a palace for Great Celestial Emperor Violet Spirit." Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen looked at Wu Qi and said with a faint smile, "As for Great Celestial Emperor Violet Spirit, as long as he can make all the immortal officials and officials of the celestial court submit to him willingly, he will have full control over all the immortal officials and officials who submit to him." Wu Qi blinked his eyes. He was stunned by Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's words. Chapter 1161. Do you mean that as long as the subjects of the celestial court submit to His Majesty, the posts they are responsible for will be under His Majesty's control? Wu Qi looked at the two great celestial emperors in surprise and amusement. How did they come up with such an idea? If Shouzhua esteemed was really an unworldly wild crane, an individual cultivator who had lived in seclusion for countless years, and a powerful figure who had just stood out in the war of deification by luck, then the move of the two heaven emperors had really hit Shouzhua esteemed's weak spot. Nowadays, all the people who held the power in the celestial court were disciples of Tao League, and the gods, celestial lords, and chief officials of all the departments were core disciples of Tao League. The 6 great celestial emperors were their masters or patriarchs, and they were loyal to them. So, how could they submit to a man who had no roots and no backing? But, esteemed Shouzhua was not an itinerant cultivator who lived in seclusion, but a clone of Wu Qi. With a strange smile on his face, Wu Qi said, "In that case, can you promise me that as long as someone submits to His Majesty, you won't try to divide their power or do something else to them?" He paused for a brief moment, then frowned and said, "Let me give you an example. For example, if the thunder demon rinsing devil from the 9th heavens, the righteous god of the thunder division, had surrendered to His Majesty. This is just an example. If he really did surrender to His Majesty, but His Majesty and His Majesty established a new thunder division." Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen could not help but laugh out loud. Shaking his head, he said, "Why do you say that? Are we the kind of people who go back on their word? As long as Great Celestial Emperor can recruit a follower, no matter who he recruits, he will be the supervisor of that division." Narrowing his eyes, Wu Qi said with a smile, "In that case, if the commander of the Southern Heavenly Gate submitted to His Majesty, then when His Majesty wants to mobilize the Southern Heavenly Gate's soldiers in the future, he will have to ask His Majesty to issue a military order. Isn't that right? Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen nodded and said with a smile, that's right. Ao Buzan, who was standing at the side, said in a low, muffled voice, you two have agreed to this, but what about the other four? You 6 sky emperors, only 2 people promised this matter. If the other 4 become hostile afterwards, wouldn't we still suffer losses? Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yen said calmly, this is the decision of the 6 of us. 4 wisps of purple chi floated down from the sky at the same time, and the misty purple chi fell straight towards Wu Qi. He grabbed the purple chi in his hand, and a voice came from each of them. Sure enough, the other 4 celestial emperors agreed with Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen and Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's decision. As long as esteemed Shozhua could win over any immortal official in the celestial court, the office of that immortal official would henceforth be under esteemed Shozhua's control, and the other 6 great celestial emperors would never interfere. Wu Qi looked at the 2 great celestial emperors in front of him and smiled, and so did the other 2 great celestial emperors. All 3 of them were smiling brightly, but there was a hint of sinister scheming in their bright smiles. Wu Qi understood what the 2 great celestial emperors meant. This was the rule of the game set by the 6 celestial emperors who had been conferred the title of God. The more immortal official Shozhua could win over, the more power he would have. If he couldn't win over anyone, it meant that he didn't have the ability. In that case, he would just be an empty shell of a celestial emperor and not cause any trouble for the 6 of them. It was clear that the addition of Wu Qi's party and Dei's supremacy had put too much pressure on the 6 great celestial emperors. If they really forced esteemed Shozhua too much, Wu Qi and the others would turn the celestial court into a mess before the Realmbreakers attacked. At such a critical and delicate moment, they couldn't force Wu Qi and his party to rebel. Dei's supremacy was a good example. He had betrayed Buddhism with all his disciples. It was hard to imagine what would happen if the 7th great celestial emperor appointed by Daozu led a large group of people to seek refuge with Buddhism. But the 6 great celestial emperors knew that if things really developed to that point, when Daozu came out of his closed-door training, the 6 of them would not be able to bear the consequences, and they might not even be able to get away with it. The 3 of them looked at each other for a long time. Wu Qi applauded softly and praised, the 6 great celestial emperors are so righteous, which is really touching. That's good. In this way, the celestial court will be clear, and everyone can live in harmony. We can work together to fight against the demons in the outside world. What a happy thing it is. The other 2 great celestial emperors also laughed. Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yen glanced at Immortal Green Melon, who was still hanging on the archway, and said to Wu Qi with a kind smile, Green Melon is my disciple, and he has always been diligent and steady. I wonder if you can put him down. Wu Qi waved his hand generously, and the Green Melon Immortal who was hanging on the arch fell heavily to the ground. Immortal Green Melon grunted in pain, but he dared not say a word. He struggled to his feet, pulled out a Taoist robe, and put it on. All his immortal energy was imprisoned by Dei's supremacy, and the Taoist robe rubbed against the terrible wounds on his body, making him twitch in pain. Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yen did not seem to see his disciple in such a miserable state. He chatted with Wu Qi for a while, then transformed into a purple mist and rushed toward the Palace of Translucence with Yuan Yen. The other 4 great celestial emperors were waiting for them in the Palace of Translucence. The 6 of them had to work out a plan, and in the near future, they had to step up the monitoring of all the departments of the Celestial Court. It should be noted that the core and elite disciples of the Tao League only occupied the middle and upper positions in all departments of the Celestial Court. Most of the middle and lower positions were held by the disciples from the immortal sects and cultivators from the Ghost Realm, Fiend Realm, Spirit Realm, and Demon Realm, who were sent to the list of investiture of the gods. If some of these people turned to Lord Shozhua, it would be a great surprise. For example, the Tranquil Bureau under the Celestial Court, which was responsible for the cleaning of all the places in the Celestial Court. If some of the officials in the Tranquil Bureau were taken away by Lord Shozhua, would the celestial emperors have to clean their own courtyards in the future? Or would they have to send a letter to Lord Shozhua to ask him to assign them to do the cleaning? That would be a great disgrace. Not only the Tranquil Bureau, but also the Celestial Court, such as the Imperial Horse Supervisor, and other departments of various sizes. Although they were in charge of the general affairs, without them, the Celestial Court would really collapse. To prevent any mishaps, they had to come up with a plan today. With a smile on his face, Wu Qi left the government office with Ao Buzan and Dei Supremacy. Standing in front of the government office, Immortal Green Melon looked at the backs of Wu Qi and his company with hatred, but he did not dare to make a sound. From the strange attitude of great Celestial Emperor Ao Buzan today, he could tell that all the Celestial Emperors were very afraid of Wu Qi. What right did he, Immortal Green Melon, have to bear a grudge against someone whom even the Celestial Emperors were afraid of? Revenge? I'll just take it as if I was bitten by a dog. Immortal Green Melon cursed in a low voice, then rolled his eyes and fainted. Leading a large group of people and leaving the main street where the government office was located, Wu Qi and his company came to the square in front of the Hall of Translucence. Looking back at the Hall of Translucence, which stood high on a golden pedestal, Wu Qi suddenly waved at a group of heavenly soldiers standing on one side of the square and said, "Long time no see, little Bai. How have you been? Aiya, you seem to have been promoted." Clad in a silver Qilin armor, Meng Xiaobai strode out of the group of heavenly soldiers while laughing out loud. He spread his arms and gave Wu Qi a big hug. Meng Xiaobai cried out excitedly, "Brother, long time no see. How have you been?" Ao Buzan grinned and said complacently, "How can I not be? Hee hee, you little rascal, I remember you." Wu Qi roared with laughter. Hugging Meng Xiaobai tightly, he said, "How many heavenly soldiers do you have now?" Meng Xiaobai arched his brows and said, "Not long ago, the Celestial Court was plunged into chaos. Many divine warriors under the former Celestial Emperor's command were either killed or wounded. 60 to 70% of the Celestial Court's soldiers were gone. Xiaobai can be considered as one of the more senior members of the former Celestial Court. Therefore, I now have 200,000 heavenly soldiers under my command, who are responsible for the daily patrol and protection of all the immortal courts on the east side of the Palace of Enlightenment." Meng Xiaobai, an old acquaintance of Wu Qi, was a young man from Meng village outside Mount Meng on Myriad Immortals planet. After he ascended to the Celestial Court according to Wu Qi's suggestion, because of his simple and honest personality, he was valued by the former Celestial Emperor, Ziwei Lingying, and was selected to join the elite heavenly soldiers, guarding the secret realm of heaven and earth transformed from Pangu's lungs outside the 33 heavens. After that, the Celestial Court was faced with endless calamities. First, there was the invasion of fiend gods from outer domains, and then the war of investiture of gods. All 6 Celestial Emperors were tortured half to death by Wu Qi, and most of the Celestial Court's soldiers were gone. Because they were located in the secret realm, Meng Xiaobai and the people of Meng village, who had also ascended to the Celestial Court, were saved. On top of that, they had become the senior figures of the Celestial Court. They were senior figures, and they were the trusted subordinates of the former Celestial Emperor. For the Celestial Court, such men were trustworthy and useful. Therefore, with the cultivation base of a heaven immortal, Meng Xiaobai was appointed as the Heavenly General of Patrol, commanding 200,000 heavenly soldiers, who were responsible for the daily patrol and protection of all the immortal courts on the east side of the Palace of Enlightenment. Inside the Palace of Enlightenment, all 6 Celestial Emperors crushed the jade cups in their hands at the same time. Outside the Palace of Enlightenment, Wu Qi patted Meng Xiaobai's shoulder and said, "All right, from now on, just follow Ziwei Lingying Great Celestial Emperor. Apart from his personal decree, you just need to ignore all the decrees from the other 6 Great Celestial Emperors." Meng Xiaobai had no idea about the power struggle between the Celestial Emperors. He only knew that Wu Qi was the man he and the people of Meng village trusted the most. Even though so many years had passed, and they had gone through so many trials and hardships, Wu Qi was still the best brother in the hearts of the people of Meng village. He stuck out his chest and cried out, "Don't worry, elder brother. Apart from Ziwei Lingying Great Celestial Emperor, I won't obey any orders from any other Celestial Emperor." The sound of footsteps could be heard, as several hundred people of Meng village, clad in various armors, rushed to the scene. They greeted Wu Qi happily, then began to laugh and play with Wu Qi. Just like Meng Xiaobai, these people of Meng village had ascended to the celestial court one after another under the arrangement of Wu Qi, and all of them had survived all the calamities in the celestial court. Currently, they did not have a great power and status in the celestial court, but they were the heavenly generals at the lowest level of the celestial court. Each of them had 30 to 100,000 heavenly soldiers under their command, and they were responsible for patrolling and guarding the area, which basically included 7 floors of all the important immortal sectors around the Hall of Enlightenment. After the people of Meng village swore allegiance to Ziwei Lingying Great Celestial Emperor, a large number of low-ranking officials were introduced to Wu Qi by these men of Meng village. Right in front of the Hall of Enlightenment, right under the nose of 6 celestial emperors, nearly 1,000 low-ranking officials kowtowed and greeted Wu Qi. These people were the low-ranking officials of the celestial court who had survived a few calamities in the celestial court because of the help of the people of Meng village. Just like what the 6 celestial emperors were worried about, these nearly 1,000 low-ranking officials did not have a great power, but they were in charge of some very awkward departments. For example, one of them was the order of the wine master of the celestial court. Without his order, no one could drink the immortal wine specially made by the celestial court. Wu Qi smiled so widely that his eyes narrowed into 2 lines. The faces of the 6 celestial emperors were twitching, and their minds were in a dilemma. What was going on? Wu Qi was once the king of East Sea of Diyu. How could he know so many officials of the celestial court? Chapter 1162. In the 33 heavens of the celestial court, the heaven of 3 pure ones, the heaven of 3 pure ones with the best feng shui and the most abundant natural energy, the southern side of Mount Miaoyuan, which was known as the ancestor of the 3 pure ones' spiritual veins, had been cleared out overnight. In the center, a group of palaces covering dozens of acres had been built, but countless palaces, pavilions, drill grounds, warehouses, and other ancillary buildings were still being built. Building palaces in the celestial court was an extremely tedious task. Any heaven immortal could build tens of thousands of ordinary houses in a single night. But what was being built here was the temporary imperial residence of the great celestial emperor, so it could not be treated carelessly. The foundations of the palaces had to go 36,000 miles underground, and all the sand and soil had to be solidified by the method of turning the earth into steel. Then, a large number of treasures, such as jade marrow and immortal crystals, were buried in the soil to communicate with the vast spiritual veins of Mount Miaoyuan, and a huge spirit cave was built under the palaces. Huge immortal formations of gathering and channeling energy were set up around the spirit cave to gather natural energy and release it when needed. These immortal formations were the energy source of all the restrictive formations on the surface. It required dozens of Tao reasoning realm primordial immortals to work together to set up these immortal formations, and each of them had to be an expert in formations to complete such a large-scale work. If this was the residence of an ordinary divine general or heavenly lord, it would be a great honor to have dozens of golden immortals to set up the formations for him. But this was the temporary imperial residence of a great celestial emperor, and it required dozens of primordial immortals to work together. This was the system that the celestial court had tacitly agreed upon for many years. There were many more underground arrangements, including all kinds of complicated restrictive spells, but there were huge groups of formations that could not be listed in detail. As for the palaces and pavilions on the surface, the materials of every brick and tile, the color, the shape, and the patterns that should be carved on them had to be standardized, and no one was allowed to go beyond the standard. For example, the defensive power of any tile in the great celestial emperor's temporary imperial residence was comparable to that of a supreme-grade gold immortal artifact, and each tile had to withstand a joint attack from 108 peak-level gold immortals. The tiles were the same, and so were all the bricks. The beams, pillars, and window frames were all of the same standard. If the materials used to build the celestial emperor's bedchamber were of an unbelievably high standard, it would be a small war fortress that could withstand the joint attack of 108 primordial immortals in the realm of Tao reasoning. Moreover, it had to withstand the joint attack of 108 primordial immortals for 3 years before it could be put into use. During the strict inspection process, the slightest mistake would result in a great disaster, and the immortal craftsman in charge of firing these bricks and tiles would be severely punished. Hundreds of generations ago, when a temporary imperial residence was being built for a newly ascended celestial emperor, the 300,000 immortal craftsmen responsible for the construction of the temporary imperial residence were all stripped of their immortal records and sent into the cycle of reincarnation. From this, one could see how much energy, manpower, resources, and financial resources the celestial court had spent on the construction of a celestial emperor's temporary imperial residence. Countless immortal craftsmen were busy working on the flat land, as there were too many things they had to build. A qualified temporary imperial abode of the celestial emperor needed at least 99 courtyards, and dozens of beautiful gardens in the north, south, east, and west. It also needed immortal officials under its command to handle daily affairs, and it also needed a large number of barracks and drill grounds for celestial soldiers and generals. Any celestial emperor had at least 1 trillion celestial soldiers, and there were hundreds of millions of celestial soldiers and generals stationed in the temporary imperial residence to protect them. Therefore, it would take too much effort to build a palace that measured 1,000,000 miles in circumference. In addition to these immortal craftsmen, there were also many lower-grade immortal officials and immortal officials of the celestial court, clad in green or green outfits, who kept coming in and out of the offices of immortal officials. Beaming with joy, they handed in one official document after another, then received one imperial decree after another, and carried out their tasks according to the decree. Although only one main hall and a few temporary halls had been built, Reverend Shoujua, who sat high up in the hall, was grinning from ear to ear. It had been a few years since he was conferred the 7th celestial emperor of the celestial court, and today, he finally tasted the taste of power. Wu Qi and Reverend Heavenly Yi each had a desk under Reverend Shoujua's throne. In front of Wu Qi were countless official documents, which he was carefully reading and replying to one by one. Meanwhile, Reverend Heavenly Yi was sitting behind the desk, with a plate of braised pork trotters and a jar of fine wine placed in front of him, eating and drinking happily. The main hall was filled with immortal officials and immortal officials, clad in green and green outfits. Although their grades were very low, they were the managers of the various immortal officials of the celestial court. Now, they were on duty in Reverend Shoujua's palace, and the various tasks they needed to handle were directly handed over to Reverend Shoujua and Wu Qi. Suddenly, Wu Qi laughed coldly and said, "Heavenly Origin Celestial Lord is a good-for-nothing. He wants to consume 30,000 jars of cold fragrant stark-congealing wine, a 10,000-year-old wine. Are all the guests he has invited pigs? Even pigs can't drink so much wine. Tell him he doesn't have 30,000 jars, and send him 30 jars of cold fragrant stark-congealing wine. If he's not happy, tell him to come talk to me." Quickly writing a line of characters on an official document, Wu Qi handed it to Ao Buzan, who stood next to him, and through Ao Buzan, he handed it to the wine overseer, who was standing in the main hall with a smile on his face. The wine overseer smiled so hard that his eyes narrowed into 2 lines. Hastily, he took the document and kowtowed to Reverend Shoujua, then left happily. The tens of thousands of immortal officials and immortal officials on duty in the main hall were all grinning from ear to ear. Who was Heavenly Origin Celestial Lord? He was the leader of the 1,080,000 celestial lords newly conferred, the commander of the most important fighting force of the celestial court, and the trusted disciple of great celestial emperor Yuan Yan. Relying on his identity, his overall strength, his background, and the resentment of being sent to the list of deification for no reason, Heavenly Origin Celestial Lord had never treated these low-ranking immortal officials of the celestial court kindly. Usually, no matter what they did to offend Heavenly Origin Celestial Lord, he would beat and scold these low-ranking immortal officials. On several occasions, the divine bodies of a few immortal officials had disintegrated, and Yuan Ling had no choice but to return to the deification pool to reform his divine body. It should be noted that although these immortal officials of the celestial court had been conferred as gods, and as long as the heavenly Tao existed, Yuan Ling could not destroy them, theoretically speaking, they were also existences of the level of Tao fusing. However, the pain of having their bodies disintegrated was indescribable, and the sense of humiliation made these low-ranking immortal officials and immortal officials feel a common hatred for a common enemy. It was just that heavenly origin celestial lord had such a powerful background that none of these ordinary immortal officials and immortal officials dared to provoke him. But now, Wu Qi was recruiting people, and some of them were people he had planted in the celestial court beforehand. Through their persuasion, a large number of low-ranking immortal officials and immortal officials came to him. Now, when they saw that someone dared to show disrespect to heavenly origin celestial lord, they were extremely pleased. These immortal officials and immortal officials knew very well that they were in charge of some of the most inconspicuous but deadly duties in the celestial court. Any important figure of the celestial court would find it difficult to do anything if they left these inconspicuous duties. Just as Wu Qi sent back heavenly origin celestial lord's edict, he heard a shrill howl coming from afar. Then, a cloud of gold and purple mist rushed into the hall, and an extremely beautiful female immortal rushed into the hall angrily. Many immortal officials and immortal officials shrunk their necks. They knew this female immortal. She was Goddess Long Yi, a disciple of great celestial Emperor Yuanchu. She had a fiery temperament, and was conferred as the leader of the 360 righteous gods of the fire division of the celestial court, and the commander of the fire division of the celestial court. The fire division of the celestial court was one of the most important forces in the celestial court. It had 360 righteous gods, 1,080 deputy gods, 100,000 divine generals, and 1 billion divine soldiers of the fire division. Usually, Goddess Long Yi was even more feared than heavenly origin celestial lord, because as a woman, even a glance at her was considered a blasphemy. In just a few years, she had sent nearly 1,000 unlucky people into the deification pool to recondense their divine bodies. Striding up to Wu Qi's desk, Goddess Long Yi bellowed, "I said yesterday that I want the Imperial Horse Supervisor to prepare 100,000 flying celestial horses for me. Why haven't you sent them over today?" Unhurriedly, Wu Qi looked up at Goddess Long Yi, then suddenly pulled out the seal hanging on his waist and smashed it down on her face. The pitiful Goddess Long Yi's beautiful face had caved in, and all her teeth were spat out. Lightning flashed on the seal, and a purple thunderbolt knocked Goddess Long Yi out of the hall. Only then did Wu Qi roar, "How dare you! This is the hall where Violet Spirit Great Celestial Emperor handles government affairs. Who dares to break in without permission?" Goddess Long Yi struggled to her feet, her face almost sunk into her skull. She howled miserably as 5 crimson sword beams suddenly flew out from behind her and swept toward the hall. Sitting motionlessly on the throne, esteemed Shou Zhuo snorted coldly. With a casual flick of his sleeve, a loud boom rang out as the 5 flaming immortal swords shattered, and an invisible force slammed onto Goddess Long Yi's body, almost blasting her ample breasts out of her back. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere as Goddess Long Yi howled and turned into a beam of flame, fleeing in a panic. His voice rang through the 33 heavens, "Whoever dares to make trouble in my place will learn from Goddess Long Yi's mistakes. No matter what business you have, no matter how urgent it is, even if your mother is dead and you need a coffin, you'll have to wait for my careful study and approval. Who dares to use force? Do you really think my treasured sword is useless?" Accompanied by esteemed Shou Zhuo's roar, Wu Qi's cold voice rang through the 33 heavens, so that all the deities in the celestial court could hear it clearly. "This is worth considering. Ah, Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen wants to make 36 new sets of imperial robes? TSK, that's too expensive. 1 set of imperial robes can be used to make at least 10 sets of primordial weapons. Now that the fiends from the outer domains are eyeing us covetously, the limited financial resources of the celestial court must be used to deal with them. How can we spend money on a few sets of clothes for no reason? Well, the imperial robes of the celestial emperor are indestructible, not dirty, not stained with dust, and not stained with sweat. So why do we need to prepare 36 sets of spare? This won't do. We must always keep in mind the word simplicity. Extravagance and waste is out of the question. By the way, Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's palace actually needs 1 million kilograms of refined 100 flower essence to make incense? Is he making incense or bacon? 1 million kilograms is a waste of manpower and money. 100 kilograms is enough. Also, what does Western Saint Spirit Lord mean by this? He wants the imperial stables to prepare 18 heavenly dragons for him to drive the chariot. Is this a provocation? Western Saint Spirit Lord, are you provoking the dignity of the dragons? We don't have any heavenly dragons, but I'll give you 18 five-flower pythons that have turned into spirits. They look like heavenly dragons. Remember to be simplicity, simplicity. Countless deities in the 33 heavens broke the furnishings around them at the same time. Chapter 1163. In Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's bedchamber, a maid dressed in purple carefully served him a cup of fragrant tea. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen rubbed his temples and breathed a long sigh of relief. Just now, in the Hall of Translucence, led by Celestial Lord Heavenly Origin and Goddess Long Yi, thousands of Celestial Lords, Celestial Ladies, Celestial Lords, and other high-ranking members of the Celestial Court had complained to the 6 great Celestial Emperors for 4 to 6 hours. 80% of the low-ranking immortal officials of the Celestial Court were under Wu Qi's control. Because they had eaten Wu Qi's share of the pie, their mansions were in dire straits. In particular, Goddess Long Yi was almost disfigured by Wu Qi, which infuriated Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen even more. But when Goddess Long Yi barged into esteemed Shou Zhuo's conference hall, according to the commandments of the Celestial Court, she should have been sent to the God execution platform, not to mention Wu Qi had injured her. In any case, Wu Qi was in the right, and Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen could not do anything to him. It was not easy to appease Celestial Lord Heavenly Origin and the others, but Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen could not think of a way to deal with Wu Qi. How did Wu Qi manage to subdue so many low-ranking immortal officials in just a few days? Lifting up his teacup and removing the lid, Great Celestial Emperor murmured to himself in a low voice, "Look at Meng Xiaobai and the others, as well as the immortal officials of the other immortal courts. Could he have started planning before the conferred God War?" At the thought of this, Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's heart skipped a beat. It was true that the conferred God thrones had been conferred during the conferred God War, but the Celestial Court still used most of the old Celestial Court's heritage. If Wu Qi had rushed to stir up trouble in the Celestial Court before the conferred God War, it would not have been strange for him to achieve such a result. In particular, the low-ranking immortal officials of the Celestial Court were not Dao League's core disciples, and more than half of them were fiend, ghost, demon, or spirit. Since they had been harmed by Dao League, it was only natural that they would submit to Wu Qi. Damn it! I can't believe that Wu Qi is so cunning. Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yen frowned angrily and took a big gulp of tea. As soon as the tea entered his mouth, Yuan Yen Great Celestial Emperor suddenly cried out sternly, "Why does it taste like this? The agarwood devil's vine that Guaran wants is cooked with the dew from the 10,000-year-old iron branch old plum. Why is it being cooked with ordinary immortal spring water?" The maidservant in purple who served the tea just now dropped to her knees. Trembling with fear, she said, "Your Majesty, it's Nyayaonu, the palace leader of Incense Offering Palace, who said that Great Celestial Emperor Ziji Lingxin has issued a decree, ordering all the immortal maidservants in the Incense Offering Palace to only collect the ingredients needed for concocting pills. The dew used to brew tea and the nectar used for bathing your Majesty will no longer be supplied to you. You can only use ordinary immortal spring water." Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen was so angry that his eyeballs almost popped out. "Do you think Lord Shou Zhuo has to worry about my tea and bath?" he roared. This was simply going too far. This was simply preposterous. "Summon that Nyayaonu right now. I want." After roaring angrily a few times, Yuan Yen suddenly shut his mouth. He lowered his head and snorted a few times, then the teacup in his palm suddenly turned into a wisp of smoke and vanished. He and the other great celestial emperors had promised that no matter how many immortal officials Wu Qi could bring to his side, they would never interfere with Wu Qi's deployment of those immortal officials, let alone play any other tricks. His oath was still ringing in his ears. How could he break it now? Great Celestial Emperor could not help but gasp. More than 90% of all the administrative departments of the Celestial Court were now under Wu Qi's control. Without Wu Qi's cooperation, the only departments he, the 6 great celestial emperors, could control were the powerful departments of the Celestial Court. However, the powerful departments of the heaven were only useful when it came to sending troops to war. When the troops were sent to war, they would need the help of the logistics departments in Wuqi's hands to provide the necessary armors, supplies, medicines, and so on. Although all the immortals of the celestial court could eat the wind and drink the dew, and would not starve to death even if they did not eat or drink for thousands of years, which immortal would really eat the northwest wind all day long? Although the northwest wind was rich in natural energy, it did not taste good. Even immortals had a desire for good food, and many immortals were even interested in women. All this required the cooperation of the departments of the general affairs. Great Celestial Emperor suddenly felt that he and the other 5 great celestial emperors were like a strong giant with the power to topple mountains and overturn seas. But, his little penis was tightly grabbed by Wuqi, and he could not move at all. This is simply going too far. This is simply preposterous. While he was murmuring to himself, Great Celestial Emperor slowly rose to his feet and walked out of the bedchamber. He could not let Wuqi go on like this. Although Wuqi's means seemed like a child's game, they had made the entire celestial court restless. It was as if there were a lot of fleas jumping around on one's body, and if one could not be killed, one would be disgusted to death. He had to think of a way to make Wuqi calm down. Great Celestial Emperor knew that Wuqi was demonstrating his power, showing off how many hidden forces he had among the low-level immortal officials and officials in the celestial court. He had to make him calm down, or he would feel that there was no point in being a celestial emperor anymore. He couldn't even drink the fragrant tea that he liked. Wasn't this too aggrieved for him? After standing at the entrance of the bedchamber for a while, Great Celestial Emperor suddenly saw Luo Kadi walking over with a group of women in the corridor ahead. Great Celestial Emperor raised his brows and snapped, "Minister Luo, who are these people you've brought?" Luo Kadi had been sent to the celestial court by Wuqi many years ago. After a series of operations, including all kinds of old means of bribery, coercion, and roping, Luo Kadi had actually become a deacon of the Hall of Fragrance after he became a deity. The Hall of Fragrance was, to put it bluntly, an organization that managed the harem for the 6 great celestial emperors. From the selection of eunuchs to the selection of palace maids, everything had to go through the Hall of Fragrance. It must be noted that the 6 great celestial emperors were once the 6 great sect masters of Tao League. Their cultivation was profound, and their lustful thoughts had long since ceased to exist. But now, their immortal bodies had collapsed and their immortal souls had vanished. Their divine bodies, which were condensed by Yuan Ling with the power of the heavenly Tao, were not as pure as an immortal's, and their cultivation and state of mind had long since been destroyed. Therefore, the 6 great celestial emperors still paid some attention when it came to women. Therefore, when choosing palace maids and maids for them, they naturally had to choose female immortals who were beautiful, had excellent figures, and came from prestigious and upright sections. Be it in conversation or upbringing, they were all excellent. But when Great Celestial Emperor looked at them from afar, he felt that something was wrong with the more than 100 immortals brought by Luo Kadi. That was why he shouted out loud. Luo Kadi hurriedly dropped to his knees and bowed to Great Celestial Emperor. With a strange expression on his face, he crooked his lips and said, "Your Majesty, these are the personal eunuchs that Lord Wuqi has chosen for your Majesty. They are all female immortals who have just ascended, and they are all virgins." After thinking for a long time, Luo Kadi really could not describe the hundreds of beauties behind him, so he could only choose one of their greatest strengths to report to Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen. At this moment, Luo Kadi's admiration and respect for Wuqi, whom he had not seen for many years, increased by 100-fold. "You are the only one in history who dares to tease the Great Celestial Emperor of the Celestial Court like this." Luo Kadi's strange tone did not escape Great Celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's ears. He hastily fixed his eyes on the group of beauties, and what he saw almost made him vomit blood. What kind of supreme-grade female immortals are they? Even many mortals in the world knew that female cultivators had at least 3 chances to adjust their appearance during the long process of cultivation. When they formed their nascent soul and nascent divinity, they transcended their tribulation and ascended. After 3 adjustments, even ordinary female immortals would become heavenly beauties. female immortals who were already beautiful would become country-toppling beauties. But, these hundreds of female immortals in front of him all looked similar to catfish, who had yet to fully transform into a human. Judging from their mottled and twisted faces, one could vaguely tell what their true forms were. There were locusts, longhorn beetles, wild boars, hyenas, great white sharks, and another one that was grinning at great celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen. It was clearly a giant mammoth. How much effort, spirit, manpower, and time had it taken to select such a group of supreme-grade female immortals from among the female immortals who had just ascended? And how efficient was it that he could bring all these supreme-grade female immortals together and offer them to great celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen in just 2 days after he came to power? Great celestial Emperor was shivering all over. A ball of lightning kept flashing in his palm, and he suddenly had an impulse to rush into esteemed Suoju's meeting hall and slap Wu Qi to ashes. Even if he wanted to bully others, there was a bottom line. He could tolerate small things like tea, clothes, and mounts, but no man with a normal sense of aesthetics could tolerate this group of beautiful women in front of him. Is he insulting me? Great Celestial Emperor pointed at Luo Kadi and bellowed, Luo Kadi, how dare you bring these things to me? Why you? Do you want to die? Luo Kadi rolled his eyes, then suddenly rose to his feet and sneered, not satisfied? If you're not satisfied, I won't serve you anymore. With a flick of his sleeve, Luo Kadi spun and left. As he walked, he said with a cold smile, Lord Wu Qi has been my superior for many years. I, Shao Xian, will naturally follow his words. As for you, your majesty, it's good enough that you have women for you. If you continue to be so picky, I'll do my best next time and send you some supreme-grade goods. How about that? Just like that, a mere lord of the Hall of Fragrance walked out of great celestial Emperor Yuanzhen's bedchamber with his head held high and his mouth full of curses. Great celestial Emperor was at a loss. Trembling, he looked at Luo Kadi's back and coughed up a mouthful of blood 30 feet away. You've gone too far. This is outrageous. What are you trying to do by disturbing the celestial court, Wu Qi? Seeing that great celestial emperor was coughing up blood, a great white shark and a mammoth hurriedly rushed up to him and placed their thick hands on his chest. The mammoth cried out shyly, Aya, your majesty, you're a priceless treasure. You mustn't hurt yourself because of anger. The great white shark, on the other hand, rubbed Yuanzhen's chest and cried out in a sweet voice, Aya, the blood you've coughed up is really wasted. Great celestial emperor had goosebumps all over his body. He felt so disgusted that he wanted to throw up. He never thought that 2 female immortals who had just ascended would have the courage to come up to him like this. Moreover, he didn't even see how the 2 female immortals came up to him. All he saw was their stunning faces, and he almost threw up the blood. Poor great celestial emperor. At this moment, he suddenly had the illusion that he was being taken advantage of by 2 women. Just then, the 2 female immortals struck at the same time, and 4 thick arms pierced through his body. Chapter 1164. The body of a celestial emperor condensed by the great Tao of the heavenly Tao was comparable to a Tao-breaking expert who had spent his entire life cultivating the art of body cultivation. Such a body was the indestructible jade body of the Tao League and the indestructible golden body of the Buddhist League. Unless a Tao-fusing expert attacked with his true flame, no power in the entire Pangu world could hurt them. But, 2 inconspicuous female immortals, who had just ascended and looked hideous and ugly, who Wu Qi had deliberately sent here to annoy Yuan Zhen, had pierced through Yuan Zhen's body as easily as tearing a piece of tofu skin off a piece of tofu. 4 arms pierced through his chest, heart, and lower abdomen. Purple blood sprayed out. Great celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen stared at the 2 female immortals in shock, and he could not even speak. The hundreds of female immortals who had just ascended screamed at the same time and hurriedly fled in all directions. In the bedchamber, the few female immortals who served Yuan Zhen screamed and ran toward them, but suddenly, dozens of long, thin hairs shot out from the ground and pierced their bodies like sieves. The bodies of the few beautiful female immortals withered, and soon, they turned into dried corpses and fell to the ground. The appearance of the two female immortals slowly changed, and gradually, they turned into Thousand Heads and Spirit Puppet, the two world destroyers. Thousand Heads laughed strangely and said, "Interesting, we were just trying to invade the celestial court to hunt some food, but we managed to sneak in so easily. Someone even tried to disgust the celestial emperor by sending us directly to him." Spirit Puppet grinned and shook her head. "This is ridiculous. I have never seen or heard of such a thing. We have destroyed so many forces in the sacred realm, but we have never seen anything like this. A subject had actually specially selected more than 100 ugly women for his emperor? What kind of loyalty is this? What kind of praiseworthy loyalty is this?" Both of them laughed wildly at the same time. Behind Thousand Heads, countless strands of hair had already wrapped around great celestial emperor Yuan Zhen, madly extracting his enormous power. Spirit Puppet did not want to be outdone. She reached out a tentacle from the back of her head, and the top of the tentacle wriggled and transformed into a huge head, which bit Yuan Zhen on the neck. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't extract any power from Yuan Yan's body. Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen's muscles were like 100-year-old cowhide. No matter how hard they chewed and chewed, they could not extract even the slightest bit of energy essence. They sucked frantically, but even though Yuan Zhen Great Celestial Arch had a huge amount of essence energy in his body, this essence energy was like a mountain that they could not budge at all. The two world breakers looked at Yuan Zhen Great Sky King with shock. Yuan Zhen Great Sky King, who was severely injured, smiled at the two world breakers, who were frozen. The sacred world has never tried to become a god, so you might not know what the heavenly deity position represents. Yuan Zhen sighed slightly and said, "Unless you have the power to destroy all the great Tao of Pan-Gu world with a single strike, you can never gain any power from us. All of our power is bestowed by the heavenly Tao. Our power is the heavenly Tao. Although we can't cultivate, we can directly absorb the power of the heavenly Tao for our own use." Yuan Zhen Great Sky King raised his hands and grabbed Thousand Heads and Spirit Puppets' necks, then sneered and said, "Maybe you can destroy my body, but you can never kill me. You can't gain any power from my body, so how can you become stronger?" Smiling strangely, Yuan Zhen Great Sky King said to the two world breakers, who were shocked, "Not only me, but also the 5 great sky emperors. As long as it is a heavenly deity position, you can't gain any power from them. You can destroy the body of even the weakest and most inconspicuous ghost soldier and send him to the deification pool to rebuild his body. But, you can never gain anything from him." He exerted his strength with both arms, and Thousand Heads' neck was broken with a cracking sound. All of a sudden, Spirit Puppet's body exploded into a clump of silver liquid. Countless tiny silver liquid beads darted all over the sky, piercing Yuan Zhen Great Sky King's body with a swishing sound. Yuan Zhen snorted coldly. He grabbed Thousand Heads' neck tightly to stop him from moving, while madly punching Thousand Heads' body with the other hand. The punches broke Thousand Heads' bones and flesh, and blood splashed everywhere. Half of his power was drained. Even though his body was riddled with countless holes, Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yan kept striking with his Thousand Heads. Gradually, the power of wind, fire, and thunder gathered on his fists, and every punch was like a thunderclap that smashed Thousand Heads' blood and splashed everywhere. With a cracking sound, Thousand Heads was smashed into meat paste by Yuan Zhen Great Sky King, while Yuan Zhen Great Sky King's body was disintegrated by Spirit Puppet, turning into streams of golden light that drifted in all directions. In the blink of an eye, one of Great Sky King's Yuan Ling was sucked away. The celestial court trembled, and the surrounding natural energy rushed whistling toward a certain place in the celestial court. In just the space of a breath, a deafening roar could be heard, and Yuan Zhen Great Sky King strode into the bedchamber with the deity striking whip in his hand. Spirit Puppet was completely stunned. Staring at Yuan Zhen Great Sky King, he bellowed, "Why are you unharmed?" Yuan Zhen sneered and said, "As long as the deification pool exists, I, Yuan Ling, will be able to keep reforming my body. My Tao League has spent countless years preparing and countless materials to refine the investiture of the gods, condensing the power of the heavenly Tao, and finally becoming a god. How can you, a few fiends from outer domains, understand the mystery of this. 1,000 Heads' mess of minced meat on the ground slowly squirmed and quickly reformed into 1,000 Heads' body. His face had turned pale and almost transparent as he gave Yuan Zhen a death stare. Suddenly, a strand of his long hair shot out from the ground behind Yuan Zhen, piercing straight into the back of his head. Then, the hair came out from between Yuan Zhen's brows, bringing with it a drop of faint purple blood. Shaking his head slowly, 1,000 Heads said, "Yes, you have indeed restored your divine body. But, your divine body is not as strong as the previous one, and both your fleshly body and magic power are weakened by at least 5%. In other words, as long as we keep killing you, you will eventually be weakened to a certain extent." Spirit Puppet's voice came from the countless silver droplets. "No wonder you have recovered so quickly," he said with a smile. "I suppose your deification pool also has a limit, doesn't it? Or perhaps, it can only help a person recover to a certain extent within a certain period of time, and then it will take a long time to recover?" Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen's face turned cold. With a flick of his wrist, he swung the whip at 1,000 Heads. The bronze god-striking whip suddenly emitted an intense yellow light, and dozens of square-shaped talismans surged out of the whip. When the whip lashed out, the surroundings suddenly turned dark, and a huge and incomparably complicated array diagram appeared in the void. Countless stars shone in the center of the array diagram, and the heaven and earth shook at the same time. An immeasurable amount of power followed the god-striking whip to strike at the same time. Wu Qi, who was dealing with some documents in the hall, dropped them and flashed to the front of the hall. Looking up at the huge formation in the dark sky, he nodded and said smilingly, "This is it. This formation is the true purpose of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. Using the Great Tao as the formation core, and the Great Tao as the formation core, to gather the power of Pangu world for our own use." Good, good, good. The huge formation was faintly visible in the sky. Only those who truly possessed great powers could see this complicated formation. It was divided into 3 layers. The top layer was shaped like a crown, with 6 enormous, bright stars twinkling on it. The purple stars shone with a dazzling light, and were surrounded by billions of other stars. Countless stars formed the patterns of all kinds of divine beasts and birds, which obviously corresponded to the powers of different heavenly gods. Among them, there were even many strange phenomena, such as earth, water, fire, and wind. The second layer was shaped like a chessboard, square, with only a fist-sized star shining in the center. The starlight was also surrounded by billions of stars, but it was clear that these billions of stars were divided into 2 parts. One part was neatly embedded in the chessboard, and the other was connected to the sky above and the earth below, like a bridge between heaven and earth. The bottom part of the formation was shaped like a wheel, and it was divided into 6 parts. Between the 6 parts was a circular space, in which 6 large stars corresponded to the 6 stars at the top of the sky. The bottom part of the array diagram was constantly emitting streams of light, connecting with the square array diagram in the middle, giving off a feeling of endless growth. This was the formation formed by the power of the Great Tao after becoming a heavenly god. With the Great Tao as the formation, the gods as the eyes, and the billions of divine positions conferred by the Great Tao as the formation core, the controller of the formation would be able to control the laws of heavenly Tao on Pangu continent. By striking with all his might, Yuan Yan had mobilized the entire power of the Great Tao to suppress 1,000 Heads. However, he was only one of the 6 great celestial emperors of the celestial court, and the power of the Great Tao he could mobilize was only 1/6 of the corresponding power of the celestial court. In fact, this 1/6 was not even complete. Therefore, although its power was great, it had many flaws. The whip landed squarely on 1,000 Heads' head, shattering all his bones and flesh and turning them into wisps of smoke under the impact of the power of the Great Tao. Only a foot-wide mass of flesh was sped away in a beam of black light, protected by countless long black hairs as it fled out of Yuan Yan's bedchamber at lightning speed. Countless miserable howls rang out as a large number of heavenly soldiers who had rushed to the bedchamber were killed by the long hairs. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of Yuanling had fled into the deification pool, waiting to reform their divine bodies. Yuan Yen bellowed as he transformed into a plume of purple smoke and was about to chase after 1,000 heads. But Spirit Puppet let out a long cry, and countless silver droplets quickly gathered together, turning into a silver waterfall that blocked in front of Yuan Yen. The purple smoke and the silver waterfall collided tens of thousands of times, causing the void to vibrate. Most of the surrounding palaces had collapsed, and tens of thousands of heavenly soldiers were drawn into the raging tide of natural energy. Spirit Puppet let out a wild laugh as the bodies of tens of thousands of heavenly soldiers exploded in Chi-Chi, and the tens of thousands of Yuan Ling flew straight toward the deification pool. 5 streams of purple smoke rushed over from different parts of the 3 pure heavens, and great celestial Emperor Yuan Yan's scolding voice could be heard coming from afar. "Evildoer, since you have come today, don't think of leaving." Great Celestial Emperor flashed to the front of Spirit Puppet and threw out a purple handkerchief, which instantly transformed into a purple cloud and wrapped around Spirit Puppet. Suddenly, a strange howl rang out from behind Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yan, and then a tall figure, standing 20 feet tall, emerged from behind him. He swung his sword and hacked at Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yan's neck, sending his head flying thousands of feet into the air. "Remember my name, Sha Tu, the World Breaker." A sword beam flashed, and Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yan's divine body was cut into more than 100 even pieces of meat. Before Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhu, who had just revealed himself, could say anything, a wriggling figure emerged silently next to him. A thin green needle pierced through Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhu's chest, and a strange voice, which was sometimes sharp and sometimes thick, rang out faintly. "I am Yang Xian. There are so many cute little beauties here." 2 new World Breakers, Sha Tu, and World Breaker, Yang Xian, had appeared. Chapter 1165. Among the 13 World Breakers, Sha killed people by instinct, and he had the most blood on his hands. When the sacred world was destroyed, at least 1/3 of the creatures were killed by him. In particular, he didn't care about cultivation or status when he killed. As long as it was a living creature, he would kill it. As long as he could kill it, he would kill it. Even if it was a small fish in the water, as long as it touched him, it would be chopped into pieces by his great sword. Just now, Yuanzhen Great Sky King had ordered the Fire God Division to set up a formation. The sky was full of fire clouds, and countless god soldiers descended from the sky. The clouds burned red. But the big formation excluded Wu Qi. The formation was above Wu Qi's head, but it did not protect him. If Wu Qi was accidentally killed by the World Breakers, no one could say that Yuanzhen Great Sky King had used someone else to kill him. At most, it could be said that the Fire God Division did not protect Wu Qi properly. If it were someone else, they would have been blocked by the formation, and their only escape route was blocked by the Spirit Puppet. They would have been in a desperate situation. Only Wu Qi laughed coldly. His sharp and unpleasant laughter rang in the ears of the Fire God Division. Wu Qi simply pointed his hand downward. The blood centipede sword became a blood light that slowly slashed toward the countless silver droplets that the Spirit Puppet had become. Sha Tu and Yang Gui's voices rang through 3 pure sky. When Wu Qi heard their names, he narrowed his eyes. Yuanzhen Great Sky King was furious. He pointed at Wu Qi and shouted, "Wu Qi, what do you want?" Yuanzhen Great Sky King coldly grunted. He raised his right hand high and waved a light red triangular flag in his hand. Suddenly, there was a shout. The Fire God Division of the Celestial Court had brought millions of god soldiers and generals. They formed a Sky Thunder Earth Fire formation and surrounded the area. Meanwhile, the gods of the thunder, wind, rain, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, wind, rain, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, wind, rain, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, wind, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, wind, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, wind, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, wind, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, Cloud, and the other gods of the thunder, Cloud. Looking at everyone in the hall, Wu Qi waved his hand and coldly said, I am going to see what these break world people can do. Zi Xian, Yi Xia, look after this place and protect the lords in the hall. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi looked at the tens of thousands of low-level fairy officers of the celestial court in the hall. He smiled and said, if you have any friends or family, you can summon them here to seek refuge. Even if 13 break world people attack together, they will be safe here. As for Yang Xian, he was evil. He loved women. He was the cruelest and evilest of the 13 break world people. At the same time, he was the most infamous person in the saints' world, hated by many experts. Just the number of women he had killed in the holy world numbered in the trillions. During the time the world breakers were destroying the holy world, it was unknown just how many beautiful women he had killed. The spirit puppet laughed weirdly. It turned into countless silver liquid beads and flew into the sky. Its target was Wu Qi. In their judgment, Wu Qi was doomed. Judging from the aura emanated from the blood centipede sword, it was just an ordinary innate spirit artifact. Perhaps, innate spirit artifacts could be regarded as top-notch divine weapons in Pangu world, but what could they do when facing a world breaker? Unless it was a divine weapon condensed from the heavenly Tao's divine power, other weapons would probably not even be able to harm a hair on the soul puppet, right? The few celestial emperors were furious. Since when is it Wu Qi's turn to give orders here? All the righteous gods are powerful military forces under the direct command of the celestial emperor. It's one thing for you to meddle in those departments and cause trouble for the heaven, but now you want to meddle in the departments of thunder, fire, wind, and lightning as well. The 6 celestial emperors were furious. Wu Qi had single-handedly killed 3 world breakers, but the gods had been useless. Wasn't this a slap in the face? Sha Tu grunted. Tens of thumb-sized holes appeared on his body. Sticky, blood-colored air waves kept spurting out of those holes. Crack! The blood dragon sword turned into a sword light and flashed across the spirit puppet's body. The soul puppet suddenly let out an incomparably shrill howl. Countless silver liquid drops fell on the ground, turning into gray stones and rolling all over the ground. Wu Qi's sword had killed half of the spirit puppet's life force. Half of its body had turned into dead stones. The main gods who had arrived were all shocked. Wu Qi was giving orders on behalf of the 6 sky kings. His orders seemed to be correct, but who should they listen to? Should they listen to Wu Qi? Or should they listen to the 6 sky kings? Yang Jian rolled his eyes. He grabbed the spirit puppet and slammed into the water army. A few screams were heard. The water army, which had not yet formed a formation, was broken. Yang Jian and the spirit puppet disappeared in the blink of an eye. In particular, this person was cunning. He would immediately flee as soon as something was amiss. In the past, when the few remaining experts of the saints' world were on the brink of death, they used their last resort, which was to use women as bait to ambush him and destroy his demonic body. But when Yuan Yen Great Sky King laughed, the 6 sky kings laughed at the same time. It seemed like this was a good opportunity. The god spirits that were named by the god investiture list could not be completely destroyed. 1,000 heads could devour the essence of the immortals left behind by the celestial court. How many of them were Wu Qi's spies? If all these immortals, including Meng Xiaobai, were devoured by 1,000 heads, it would save them a lot of trouble. Back then, countless living beings in the holy world were slaughtered by Sha Tuesday. In the end, it was a small founder who used the simplest strategy of luring the enemy into a jar and beat Sha Tu until his demonic body collapsed and he escaped helplessly with Yuan Ling. The 6 sky kings shook their heads at the same time. Wu Qi was dead for sure. Sha Tu, who was 6 meters tall and clad in a blood-red heavy armor, not even a bit of his skin was exposed, giggled. He waved the huge saw-toothed sword in his hand and said, "Get into formation. Get into formation. It'll make it easier for me to kill you. Hurry, hurry, hurry up and prepare the battle formation." There were fiery clouds in all directions, each of which contained an incomparably powerful law of fire. Wherever the fiery clouds passed, all other existences would be repelled. The fiery clouds covered Wuqi's head and vaguely sealed off his surroundings, leaving only a passage directly below him. Yang Yun, whose body was twisted and shrouded in a layer of mist, suddenly laughed. "Interesting," he said in a low voice, twisting his waist and twisting his body. "Death is at hand, and you are still fighting among yourselves. This is really interesting. TSK, you old geezers, do you have young and beautiful daughters and granddaughters? If you can offer me tens of thousands of beautiful girls, I can delay your death by a few days." Wuqi gave Yuan Yan a sideways glance and said slowly, "Of course, I'm here to help the 6 celestial emperors defend against the enemy. Don't tell me that I've come here fearlessly to deal with the fiends from the outer heavenly realms and ended up causing trouble. How can Wuqi endure this?" Just as the 6 celestial emperors were feeling complacent, Wuqi came whistling through the air, stepping on the crimson blood centipede sword and hovering over the crowd, not just the 3 world breakers, but the 6 celestial emperors. The remaining half of the liquid droplet flew down in a panic and reformed into the body of the spirit puppet. However, the newly condensed soul puppet's body had shrunk by a large margin, and its face had also become green and watery, almost transparent. "The enemy is strong. Sha-Tu, attack," the spirit puppet cried out. With a loud laugh, he transformed into a beam of golden light and flew toward Yuan Yan's bedchamber. Then, countless flaming signals shot out of the great hall. Sure enough, these lower-level immortal officials were calling their friends to come here and take shelter for a while. Yang Lan's eyes flickered as he helped the puppet and retreated quickly. Only Sha-Tu gave a wild roar, swung his sword and thrust it toward Wuqi's head joyfully. Similarly, Wuqi slowly drew a line with his finger. Suddenly, the sword beam transformed from the blood centipede sword disintegrated, and several dozens of tiny blood-red beams shot out, piercing through Sha-Tu's body like lightning bolts. Yang Xian snickered and whispered a few words to the puppet. The spirit puppet laughed as well. They could all see the conflict within the celestial court, and it made them very happy. The celestial court was not as strong as the sacred world had been in the past. It was not even as strong as a small sect in the sacred world. These world breakers had been badly injured in the war against the sacred world, and their vitality had not been completely used up. They were very weak, but it was too easy to destroy a small faction that was not very strong and was fighting among themselves. The spirit puppet followed this path and laughed eerily as it came for Wuqi. The great celestial emperor's action was the best reply to Wuqi's order. The 6 leaders were the ones in charge here, so what right did Wuqi have to mobilize the righteous gods? So, Wuqi ordered the thunder god to set up the sky lightning demon sweeping formation with the god soldiers. Yuan Yan's sky god ordered the fire god to set up the sky lightning earth fire formation. They could not do as Wuqi said. Sha-Tu gave a strange laugh. His body suddenly disintegrated, and the surrounding area of 10,000 miles turned into a surging sea of blood. Countless blood beads surged in all directions, shattering the Cloud Clan's gods, who were about to form a formation, and disappearing in a flash. Thinking about the cruel scene of the celestial court with corpses everywhere, the Sky Kings felt their hearts ache. It was like someone was cooking them in hot oil. As for Thousand Head's broken body, no one knew where it had gone. The Sky King's god senses searched all over 3 pure skies, but they could not find a trace of him. Most of their energy was focused on the 3 world breakers in front of them. If Thousand Head went down to the 32nd sky to cause trouble, the celestial court would suffer heavy casualties. The information about the world breakers in the 7 Holy Palace stated that Sha-Tu's killing intent was the strongest. He was the strongest of the 13 world breakers, but he was not a threat to the real elites. Sha-Tu's heart was filled with murderous intent. To put it bluntly, his brain was not very good. If he used the right strategy, it would be enough to kill him. Without waiting for the 6 Sky Kings to speak, Wuqi waved his sleeves. A cold wind rose from the ground. It carried sand and dust with it. The sky soldiers and sky generals were all thrown dozens of miles away. He coldly laughed and said, "Normal shrimp soldiers and crab generals do not need to come." The 360 gods of the Celestial Court's Thunder Division are all here. Set up the Thunder Demon sweeping formation. The other gods will lead troops to guard the area. If a demon escapes, you will be responsible. Outside the palace, Yuan Yan Great Sky King and Yuan Chu Great Sky King had just used the deification pool to create a god body. Compared to the god body that had been refined by the spirit chi of the sky and earth for years, the new god body was weaker. The 6 Sky Kings looked gloomy. They stood in 6 directions, surrounding Spirit Puppet, Sha Tu, and Yang Gui, the 3 world breakers.